Welcome back. Good evening. Ooh. Oh, there we go. We got sound. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors meeting. It is Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. Happy New Year to everyone. We are in the Freeport High School Library, and Kelly will not be with us this evening, and Maura will be, but she's running a few minutes behind, so we'll get started with the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do I have a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes from the December 13th, 2023 meeting as presented, barring any errors or omissions? Kara, thank you. And Beth? All those in favor? Great. None opposed. Adjustments to the agenda.
I have a couple this evening. Under 8, Superintendent's Report. A, items for information. Number 1, I have an additional resignation to announce. And I'd like to add a number 3 under item A, school start time discussion.
All right. All right, so we will move on to good news and recognition, and we will start with the report from our student rep, Lily.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. We have a lot of exciting updates happening here at the high school. Tomorrow we'll be having the winter concert for our concert band, which will also include the middle school. This is not just going to be for a concert band. We'll also have the jazz combo, string trio, and cover band performing. So it's going to be a pretty big night. Later on in the month, we will have the FHS choral concert, which is January 29th. And both of these are happening at 6:30 here in the FPAC. These groups have been working extremely hard, so I highly recommend you come and support FHS. On to sports. We have the winter teams been doing pretty well in the season. Some special recognition to Teo Steverling Horn, who won the boys Nordic ski races both yesterday and the week before, which has been putting our boys and girls teams in a very good spot this year. Finally, in the community, students in leadership committees across the school have asked me to pass along a message to the superintendent that they really appreciate the recent discussions and are looking forward to hearing more about your thoughts regarding the topics and concerns that they brought up. And finally, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, a lot of college reports have been coming out for early decision students, and we have 2 students off to Ivies, which is Cornell and Dartmouth, which has been super exciting. So yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Lily. All right, so public comment. I don't see anyone bum rushing the stage, so we will carry on with number 8, report from the superintendent.
A1, resignations. Announcing a resignation of Brenda Anderson, bus driver custodian, John Rundon, mechanic, and Lindsay Leverrier, Moore Street School Ed Tech. And also we've received the resignation from Mallory Stilkey, custodian, Moore Street School. We have 2 retirements at the end of the school year. Melinda Carr, instructional strategist, and Melissa Cousins, speech and language pathologist. And we certainly thank them for all their years of service. Item 3, school start time discussion. Last week, Assistant Superintendent Alexander and I met with administrators from Brunswick, MSAD 75, and RSU 1, which is in Bath. RSU 1 started in Bath, began exploring the possibility of a later high school start time back in actually 2019. They began doing research and also having some focus groups. COVID put the stop to that work. They had to shift their focus, but they've beginning to re-engage with their community. So we had an opportunity to hear about their process All three superintendents from the sending districts to Region 10, which is us, Brunswick and SAD 75, have expressed interest in us doing some research and having some community discussions about high school start time. And this evening, I'm just want to get a sense of the board if you would like me to proceed. We don't need a formal vote, but I just want to have some feedback if you let me to proceed with this work.
Beth.
I would say yes, definitely. I've read some things recently about obviously how much the kids are struggling mental health wise. And basically, if there's anything that we can do to get them more rest, to get them more sleep, however that may work. And I mean, I would be in full favor of that.
Lots of nodding. Yes, Karen.
I also would agree. I would definitely continue to research this. I personally have had a bunch of medical issues. And the most important thing that has happened to me that has helped with that is sleep. And so I know from firsthand experience how important it is. And I think it would be a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to extend that opportunity to high school students and see their improvements.
Yeah, I think, I don't know anyone who's opposed to the concept of the high school, a later start time for the high school. I mean, obviously the issue is logistics around transportation, around other districts around us and sports and athletics and all of the other pieces of the puzzle that would have to fall into place to make it successful. But I think the best way to make it successful is to have more people doing it. So particularly for Region 10, I mean, I think we would be a little bit hamstrung if we wanted to do it, but the other two sending districts didn't. Now that we kind of have an aligned schedule between the three districts, I think it makes a lot of sense, particularly if everyone is open to the concept. This doesn't mean we're doing it. It just means we're starting the conversation to research like what it might look like. And I think that's a great next step.
And,
Maura.
and I do want folks to know as well, it would not be for next school year because there's we need to certainly do the research, have conversations, and then do some planning for that. If it was going to happen at all, it would not be for next year.
I agree with what everyone else has said. I think I've come to feel really strongly about this as a board member because I've read evidence that biologically teenagers, when they're in puberty, need more sleep and their clock resets so that it's harder for them to go to sleep early and their, I don't know, whatever circadian rhythm just starts later in the evening. It's looking at me like I'm trying to be a scientist. I've read, I'm just saying, I think that, we're a very student-centered district, and that's always important to us to put the kids first. And I think all those other logistical pieces can be changed if the well-being of, our high school students is really being affected by these really early start times when what works best with their biology and for their mental health is to start later. So I don't want the community to think, oh, it's just because we want to let teenagers sleep in. There's like actual evidence that shows that this is beneficial for them. And that's really, what hits home for me about why it's worth exploring and changing all these logistical things. So thank you for doing that.
And this would, if this were to come to pass, this would include conversations with the community. It would include conversations with parents at all grade levels, right? Because we know the implications generally are if the high school kids start later, the elementary school kids start sooner. So there's daycare issues, those sort of things. So this is not a decision obviously to be made in a vacuum. And so it would include, to Superintendent Scrappa's point, why we couldn't necessarily get it into effect next year is there's a lot of conversations that have to happen across the whole communities to make something like this successful. So, and that would all be part of the process. Yes. Colin.
Yeah, I'm also fully in support of it, and I know there are many factors to be considered. I do remember at some point, maybe last year when we were discussing this, the question of athletics was brought up in terms of how any change in our start time or even the change in sort of a couple of schools start time would work with what we're then able to do with other schools. I just want to make sure that would be considered strongly, just to know how many other schools would need to do this in order for that to not be an impact on the students and their capacity to compete.
I would echo what everyone has said and more. I appreciate your point about prioritizing the well-being of the kids, and that the American Academy of Pediatrics, I believe, they recommend later start times for adolescents. So, like you're saying, there's strong argument for it. It's about the logistics of it, and I'd like to think that we can be an innovative group and a leading group in the state in this. So, thank you for exploring it.
All right. Do you have your temperature?
I think we shall go forth and explore.
Okay. Wonderful. All right. So we will move on to item 9, administrator reports, and we will start with the 24-25 Freeport High School Program of Studies with Principal Gulko. I believe you probably got the questions that were sent ahead of time. Great.
I did. Good evening, everyone. Jen Gulko. I'm turned really weird. Sam's not here, so I'm going to turn it. Because he'll tell me I'm supposed to keep it this way. Okay. So I am going to present the program of studies for board members who've been here before. You know that I don't go through every page. I just highlight the changes because this is an 86-page document. And so I have documented everything that's in that letter that has been a change from last year's program of studies. And then I have took all of the questions, kind of put them in order of what were some edits, what were some more kind of clear-cut basic answers, and then what were some more bigger picture questions and answers related to the program of studies. The purpose of the program of studies is so that people both within our school and outside of our school have an idea of all of the programs that we offer, the foundations of our grading systems, details about our school community and academics. It is not a comprehensive document. We also have the student handbook. So this is focused primarily on what we offer for academics, in case somebody was wondering about what was missing. So I think what I'll do is go through the changes and just add a little bit of information, and then I'll go through the questions that were submitted by the board. Also, just as an FYI, we don't print these anymore. We used to print the whole document, and kids got the document, and it was just a huge amount of paper. We do print a selected version for incoming 9th graders. So when the registration process starts, which, if you can believe it, starts at the end of January when we have our curriculum fair at the high school, and then we start visiting the middle schools, and then kids very quickly start registering for classes. We make an abbreviated version for the incoming 9th graders so that they know what's available to them. Excuse me. And then we also have, coming up on January 23rd, it's our first evening event for 8th grade parents and students when they have a chance to meet members of all of the departments of the high school and find out about the academic programs that we offer. And then they're able to visit after we present in the FPAC with members of the departments and ask questions about either the freshman classes or any of the classes related to those departments. So I'll go through the document, and something that's, I'll ask for a little bit of patience, is every time we make an edit, it could potentially change the page number because it's a digital document. We checked and checked and checked, and then I went in and made some edits this morning, which made my team not very happy. And so I am going with the page numbers that I've given to you on the letter. And then when I'm referencing the digital document, there might be a little bit of patience there. So first is just some updating of information with our new director of athletics. The school profile is a really important document. That is something that goes out to all colleges along with student transcripts. That is, every school sends out their profile, and that is a way that they have a snapshot of how you do things at your individual school. And so we update that each year. On page 22, we have some pretty significant changes to our habits of work system. As I have presented to the board last year and the beginning of this year, we shifted to 1 to 4 grading for habits of work. And we have also removed, so we've removed the 0 to 100 scores, and we are no longer recognizing habits of work as an honor roll. It's something that we're trying to create as habits, as part of what they're doing in order to support their academic scores. On page 24, we've added a link to request support for scholarship fees for AP tests. This actually came straight from the Student Leadership Committee. If you remember me presenting that one of the subcommittees was focused on AP tests, particularly of the costs and access to that. And so this is a live link where students, if they're feeling like they can't speak face-to-face to someone about requesting a scholarship, this is just an additional way to do that. They can, of course, request in person, but this is just an added feature that they can have there. Also on page 30, we added information about the cost of AP exams to each and every class throughout the program of studies, because part of the information that came from the Student Leadership Committee was just really wanting to make sure that all students are totally aware of both the processes for AP classes, such as having to take the AP test, and then the fees that are associated with that. Page 32, we shift into our ELA courses, and we have revised our sports media description. And then we've also replaced the class that's called Media and Social Media with Intro to Multimedia elective. That's a popular elective right now, but feeling like that description of the class is more accurate for what that teacher is introducing the students to, which is not just focused on social media. It's on all different types of media. And then we've also added new for next year is the Advanced Multimedia elective. Students who took the course this year, regardless of the name of it, are going to be able to take that advanced course next year. We have high interest in that class, so we're excited to be able to offer a second level of that. We've also added on page 34 a new PE class, Advanced Sports Training. One of our most popular classes has been weight training. And so it's not necessarily athletes that are in that class. It's students who are interested in an advanced level of fitness. And that has come from student interest as well. On page 40, we removed the specific classes of linear algebra and differential equations in terms of a post-calculus BC. That would be for our some of our strongest math students in the building. The reason that we did that is because we didn't want to just limit it to that. That is very common for students to go beyond calculus AB and go to differential equations or linear algebra or multivariable calculus. But we're finding that there are more and more options to them available online. And so there's we put that in as a description of there's multiple online options that are available to them, not just those two classes. Many years ago, I want to say it was probably maybe 6 or 7 years ago, when those classes were very expensive and hard to find online, we had them in person at school, and there was only maybe 2 kids, 3 kids that were taking that class. And now there are so many options for them to take online, which is great. We removed environmental science. Unfortunately, there was a lack of student interest. It's something that we are talking about with the science department right now about how we can bring back a class that is along those same topic lines. We do offer AP Environmental, which is a very, the kids call it APES. That is a very popular class. We have 2 sections of that. But the CP Environmental Science did not have a high number of signups, but it is something that we are looking to explore, which you will see in my budget requests when we're talking about science teachers. We removed advanced videography. That is, again, due to a lack of signups. We do have opportunities for students to do independent projects with our teacher, Jay Harper, who still teaches multiple sections of the Intro to Videography class. We are really excited to continue to offer SMCC dual enrollment, and we are consistently looking at opportunities to expand that. For those who were on the board last year, we added statistics this year, which is great. You know, the research is showing that as students are able to leave high school with college credits, that they are significantly increasing their success rates in college when they're starting with college credits right out of high school. We are considering calculus. It was something that we had considered in the past, and for multiple reasons didn't pursue that and decided to go with statistics instead. And now the math department is currently looking at calculus. So it wasn't in time for this program of studies, but if that's something that changes, I would bring that up to the board. We've added a description of teacher's aid. I have no idea why we haven't had that in the past. It is a wonderful program that we have here that just continues to expand. There's a huge number of students who are in a TA position right now in every department. And really it comes either from teachers asking the student body or individual students if they're in need of a TA, or a student asking a teacher if they have a study hall block that they don't need and request to be a TA. And obviously that's a great leadership opportunity and for students to have, and it does go on their transcript. We removed correspondence study as that's no longer offered. That has been in the program of studies for a long time. I cannot give a lot of details about what that was because it's not a program that has been active for quite some time. We removed virtual high school because that is a online program and platform that we found was not the most successful for students. They still can access that if someone was interested in, we called it VHS, but we have other programs that we have been offering to students that we have found that they're much more successful. We also used to have a teacher in the building who taught as a VHS teacher, which we no longer have. On page 65, we added information about May term. And I shared this information with the board last year, is that we are very proud of our senior project program that we have here at the high school, which is an independent project that is a passion project tied to skills and curriculum that students have learned at their time at the high school for the month of May. But we also know that that is not for everybody. Not every student is required to do a senior project. What we were finding was that in some classes, it would be one student left behind, two students left behind, and it was difficult to engage them in meaningful work in some of those classes. So May term is a collaboration of a science teacher, an ELA teacher, math teacher, Didi Benella, our outreach coordinator, and they've developed an interdisciplinary curriculum that students who are not participating in senior projects participate in May term. So basically all of our students who are seniors have a unique experience that is different from the courses that they followed throughout the year for the month of May. They continue with AP classes if they're in AP classes, and band and chorus. Those are the courses that they stay in until the end of the year, even if they're doing a senior project or they're doing May term. We have added a couple of new Region 10 courses, which we're excited about. Electrical technology is one. And if you look down a little bit further to page 71, we've added the other new Region 10 course is technology and cybersecurity, which I think is going to be a really popular class. It's unfortunate that they are not able to offer HVAC. That was, and I spelled it HCAV. Apologies for that. HVAC, there was challenges with staffing for that continuously at Region 10. And so we're looking forward to these new programs and offering those to students. And they have already started recruiting here. They've come to visit classes. They have held assemblies. Last week, our first group of students went to their Region 10 visit. And then there are once a month scheduled visits to Region 10 for students who are interested for the rest of the year. And one thing that they have changed is that at Region 10, they are no longer offering ELA. Students will take ELA for 9th and 10th graders. The students will take ELA at their home school. They will continue to offer social studies. So that is a combination of students being in line with the ELA course that's at their home school, and also with staffing challenges at Region 10 as well. And then on page 75, our clubs and activities continuously are updated. Clubs are student driven. And so if there is an interest in hosting a new club, they are able to find an advisor and find some students who are interested in propose a new club. And the opposite of that is sometimes we see that clubs are not as popular when the student who was leading it has left. Unfortunately, our student leading the herpetology club, which was the study of lizards and some bugs, which was wonderful, except for the things that we were bringing into school. They are no longer with us. So that's at the high school. They've graduated. And so some of the clubs we see come and go. So that's a fluctuating list that we update consistently. And then the at a glance is at the back, which is just a quick reference page that helps to see the categories of where these courses fall and how the credits line. So that is kind of a swift overview of that. And I think what I'll do is, if this seems okay to the board and to the board chair, is to go over the answers to the questions and then see what questions, because I think I might answer some of these as we go along. So the first question was about the matching of the numbers of summa cum laude and magna cum laude. So if you see on page 12 in the school profile, it says it in very, very small font. It's larger when we copy this and send this out to colleges and universities, is that we round up to the nearest whole number. So that's why on the school profile, it says whole numbers like 93, 89, things like that. But in the calculation of it, we do it to the decimal point so that we mathematically either round up or round down. So on those other pages, page 12 and page 21, that's purposeful that it says 88.5 or 92.5, so that students know exactly where we're rounding up or down mathematically. And so another question was, there was two questions about that, asking if those things should match, and we know that they don't match. Another question was if there was an average fee or fee ranges for the AP classes that could be added. We do not have the exact fee because we're making this now for 24-25 school year, as that's determined by the College Board. So what we did today was we added in italics what the cost this year is, which is $98. It is expensive. And so we put that in just as a guideline in parentheses. So hopefully that will help students. As soon as we get the figure from the College Board, then we make that known to students and parents. There was a note that in the course planning section on page 25, that it was missing, that there's an option for CP, stands for college prep, that there was CP and honors for ELA and 9 and ELA 10. We appreciated that catch because then we saw that it wasn't on algebra or geometry. So we added that in all of the classes that offer CP or honors. Something that we've spoken about at length with the board is that we do not offer honors level classes for 9th and 10th grade social studies. We feel strongly about those classes being heterogeneous, and that there are opportunities for students to take AP classes as soon as they are a junior in social studies. On page 25 and 26, the course sequences, this course sequences still had environmental science in there, so we took that out. And then differential equations and linear algebra were still in there, and we added in parentheses that those are online options. And we left those because those are common classes along with multivariable calculus. There were some edits about 1 additional years of science. We fixed those edits. Thank you. We always appreciate that. It's amazing how many times we look at this document, we still find those. So we are grateful for the catch. It also said 1 year of credits. So we fixed that as well. So then another question was in the at-a-glance offerings, there was a question about having to cross-check some of the elective only. And so it said, personal finance and foundations in entrepreneurship and visual classes are electives, but they're not checked as electives only. And so the reason for that is if you go to the math section or to the visual arts section, you'll see that sometimes students take courses to fulfill a graduation requirement, and sometimes they take them just because they want to take them. So we have some kids who are taking personal finance as half of their fourth year of math. Some kids are matching, they'll take a semester of personal finance and a semester of entrepreneurship, and that counts as their fourth math. But other kids have gone well beyond the math requirement, and they're taking entrepreneurship because they're interested in it, and same with personal finance. The vast majority of our students go well beyond our credit requirement of 20 credits. Any credit that goes beyond the credit requirement is called an elective. So that's just a clarification. There were a couple of questions about that. And so I wasn't sure if everyone on the board knew that the majority of kids go beyond the credits that they need, which is what we encourage them to do. And so how does something fulfill as a graduation requirement versus an elective? That's based on that student's pathway. So some students, all students are required to take 1 year of visual arts credit. Some students leave here taking 9 classes of visual arts. And so 1 is counted as the graduation credit, and the rest is on their transcript as an elective. And then the question about a sound rationale for a world language waiver. It's rare that we give a world language waiver. I would say the most common situation for that is a student whose schedule is quite full with intervention classes. So if there's a student who's below grade level in both reading and math and potentially has an academic support, which is what we offer to students on IEPs, they struggle to fit world language in there. And it's a conversation between the student, the parent, the guidance counselor, and an administrator about what, and the department chair for world languages, about whether we waive that credit or not. We really feel strongly about everyone taking the world language credit, but we recognize that for some kids, it's not the right fit. But the vast majority of our students graduate with some sort of world language class that they have taken. There was a question about the grading scale. Why wasn't it 90 to 100, 80 to 89, 70 to 79? That is because our failing grade, or our lowest passing grade, is a 70. In many schools, it's a 60. So if it was a 60, it would be 60 to 69 would be a D, 70 to 79 would be a C, 80 to 89 would be a B, 90 to 100 would be an A. Ours is adjusted because our lowest passing grade is a 70 in this school. It's something that we're looking at because that is not in line with every school that's around us. We're the only school, this is my 4th high school where I've worked, and we're the only school that failing is a 69. In the other schools, failing was a 59. It has been that way. I asked my guidance counselor, who's been here the longest, it's been that way since she's been here for 15 years. So I don't know if that has always been the case in Freeport. It's something that, anytime that we're questioning that, we look at the schools all around us and find out, we look at their program of studies to find out what their failing grade is. And it's certainly something that we would want to look at. That would be a significant change for our teachers in their grading practices for sure. And then a certificate of completion was the another question that someone asked what that was. That is something that is very rarely used. It's in extreme circumstances, and an example would be a exchange student. So they come and they have not fulfilled all of our graduation credits, but in their home country, plus they're here for 1 year and they're finishing here. So technically they have finished their studies, but they haven't completed our credits. They walk in our graduation, and instead of a diploma, they receive a certificate of completion. So then I'll move on to, or should I take questions now? Should I pause for a second, take questions now, or go on to there are 4 more kind of bigger picture questions. I can do this, however, it seems. Okay, great. Okay. There was a question of when were the FHS mission and vision and values and our core values and beliefs, when were they last revised? So those are not necessarily revised, but we certainly have a significant reflection process on those every 10 years as we participate in NEASC. So the last time that was done was in 2018, and that's faculty, students, administrators, board members, and parents who were a part of that when we developed the core values and beliefs, and that's a big part of the NEASC process. So we will be coming up in that process sooner than we think in 2027, right? Because it's 2024, which I have to keep reminding myself. How often does the board change graduation credits? This is something that happens very rarely. I would say that COVID was the thing that sparked this for many school districts, including ours. And so we were in an emergent situation in COVID, trying to figure out how we could best meet the needs of our students whose schooling was so interrupted, and making sure that they were graduating both with the knowledge that they needed, but also with the credits that they needed. And we started researching, and we were at 24 credits at that time, which was one of the highest in all of the school, if not the highest in all of the schools that were around us. And we were finding a couple of things. It was certainly impacting our graduation rate, but it was also impacting something really specific that I can use as an example, was students who were signing up for Region 10. They just didn't have the space in their schedule. And when we were talking to the Region 10 principals about how do we get more students, especially the younger students, when I first started here, we had 0 ninth graders participating in Region 10, and very, very few. It would be super rare that a 10th grader would. It was only open to 11th and 12th graders, purely because to meet our graduation credits, they didn't have space in their schedule. And so after extensive conversations with the principals around us, with the superintendent at the time and the board, we decided to go to 20 credits, knowing that that is the minimum, and knowing that we are pushing our students to go much higher than that for the credits that they take, and encouraging them to take classes that they don't need, but that they want to take. And that's something that we talk with students about a lot. Question was, how is it decided that a course is offered as an honors or an AP option? For some of the, I'm sorry that I can't remember whose question this was, because I pieced these all together into one document. So there might, if you want to elaborate on that question a little bit, some of the AP classes aren't offered to younger students because there's a prerequisite of knowledge that they have to have. They have to have previous classes in order to be successful in the AP class. In some places, you'll see, for example, in the 11th grade, and in our ELA courses, we offer ELA 11 or AP. There isn't ELA 11 honors. And that is mostly due to staffing. We don't have enough staff to be able to offer both, and feel that we are pushing students to really try to challenge themselves and take the AP class if they are feeling that they want that advanced curriculum. And so we don't, it depends on the content area, whether we have the staffing to be able to offer multiple levels of something. And then we look at the overall trajectory of courses that come before, and whether students are able to take the level and that comes before the AP class. And then the last question is a big one. It is the question between why we do not adjust or distinguish grades for honors and AP courses. I think this has maybe come up every year that I've been here. And so there has, again, this is my 9th year here. We have not had any weighted grades since I've been here. The guidance counselor that I was with today, she has been here 15 years. There's been no weighted grades in 15 years. The information that we have received from colleges and universities is that they know that every school has a unique situation in the way that they award credits and that they weight or don't weight grades. And so they each have told us that when they receive these transcripts from across the country, they use their own calculation to figure it out. And that the most important thing that they look at is the title of the courses compared to our program of studies and our school profile. Did that student take the most challenging courses that have been offered? That being said, it's something that we have started to research to find out around for the schools around us, who is waiting and who is not waiting. One of the things that I think that we are proud of is that we don't award valedictorian and salutatorian. And a lot of that is tied to mental health because we see, and I have definitely seen this in my other 3 high schools, that the race at the end, that the type of pressure that puts, and I know that it's the right decision for some high schools that they've had this as a long-standing tradition. What I have firsthand seen is that race in those, it comes down to 100ths of a point, and students are choosing classes not based on the content that they want to learn, but thinking about where it's going to put them in the rank and the weight. So right now, what we have started about a month and a half ago is doing the research of all the schools around us, who is waiting, who's not waiting grades, who has class rank that they share out, who has valedictorian and salutatorian. The vast majorities of the principals in my group have said that they do not think that class rank and valedictorian and salutatorian is helpful to students' mental health. Because it's something that we are all talking about and focused on. But we certainly don't want our students to be at any disadvantage whatsoever, which is why we want to research what the other schools are doing. I think that is the end of my talking and my the questions that were posed. So I will take any
All right.
other questions.
Who's got questions? We'll start over here. Maura.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was really informative and I appreciate it. I was wondering on the last piece, also how honor roll might factor into that. I know that's come up before and we've talked about it, whether that like as well in the same vein as what you talked about at the end there with salutatorian, valedictorian. Do other schools still do it? And because it's not weighted, I mean, I can't imagine, I don't know. I guess I'm wondering about student class choice. I can't imagine that honor roll would impact it, but it seems like there could be some similarities there. I don't know. Is that something you're exploring too?
We haven't, because I think in my opinion, the difference is that honor roll doesn't have kids competing against one another. They're competing against them. Do I think that for some kids it hurts their mental health? Potentially, especially because there's always going to be the student who was half a point away. No matter what number we select for the bottom of the honor roll or high honor roll, somebody almost made it. And so that's difficult. It's also a life lesson that we experience in athletics or in job interviews or auditions for things. And so we know that that's a part of it. The difference with class rank and salutatorian and valedictorian is that they're competing against one another. And they definitely know who the person is who's next to them. At least in my experience at my other high schools. So we have not thought about that because I think for some kids, I think honor roll is a positive incentive for them. It's a way for them to be recognized. And then I think we try to find other ways to recognize students. One of the things that I've been talking about with student leaders is thinking about how we recognize kids. We used to do recognition assemblies. I'll tell you one thing, teenagers hate to be labeled as the most improved. That is not an award that they want. No matter, and we had a time when parents could nominate their child to be recognized. That didn't go over well either. Now that I have a middle schooler, I understand that very well. And so it's a balance of how do we recognize students. The Student Council has started something that's just called Student and Staff Spotlight. And so kids and staff can anonymously recommend somebody to be the spotlighted student. So it's a board. When you walk out tonight, instead of going this way, if you go through the science hallway and down the math hallway, it's before you get to the nurse's office. And so things like that they're trying to do in a more subtle way. But so we haven't explored, that piece of honor roll because of that competition piece.
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer. And it just made me curious, is any of it student led, like students giving input into how they would like that recognition to go? I think it all sounds great.
Yeah, so the student council is the ones who are designing the student spotlight and talking about that. We haven't had a recognition assembly in quite some time. They're talking about who owns that. That is another piece. I do know that some students brought up the topic of weighted grades. What Lily was referring to was that Superintendent Scarpa came and met with all of the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade advisory leaders. And so we have 40 advisories and 1 or 2 students. So she got to meet with a wide span of students. And some of them brought up the question of why are we weighting or not weighting grades? Not very few students have brought that to me, but some have brought that to guidance counselors.
So I noticed on the grade point average on the profile that if I'm squint hard enough, that I think it's the 93 to 100 is the largest percentage of grade distribution. And I was pleasantly struck by that. And I just wondered if that was fairly consistent throughout the years, or if that was a little more specific to this class.
I think it varies class to class for sure. It depends. I think that this year was high, and that's a good thing. I think when you look at the years of COVID, they were an interesting mix. You know, in some places we were concerned that grades were inflated, and then because students had missed such a significant chunk of time, and it was so much harder for teachers to evaluate where they stood. And then in other places feeling like COVID really hurt their grades. And so it's hard in the last few years to compare. I think that this was, and we have classes who the percentage of who is taking honors level versus AP changes from grade to grade. But this was, for this particular class, was high, hopefully in a good way. And our graduation rate has continued to go up too. So hopefully those two things are tied.
I'm just moving my way down. So, Carolyn.
I have 2 questions, and this may or may not be the time for it. This is my first year on the board, so I'm not totally up to date with where things are supposed to go, but there are 2 things that are related to this that are very important to me. So I just wanted to mention them, and then you can let me know if we talk about them elsewhere. First one was in the media classes. I am failing to remember. There's an advanced media, multimedia, and whatnot. Does that course also have a strong focus in being able to identify misinformation and kind of go through sources and say, verify, trust but verify, that kind of stuff? Because that's, at least when I was in school, that was something that wasn't ever touched on. And quite obviously right now it's a problem. And so I was wondering if that is also part of that. It seems like it would go hand in hand with that type of course. It's probably already in there, it just wasn't in the description.
I can answer that. Yes, absolutely. And that's a big part of our social studies curriculum and our ELA curriculum, and our librarian Heidi Cook, when she meets with ELA courses, that's part of what she does too, because I think we know that students are getting their news from Snapchat and we're worried.
Yeah.
And so but that's actually not just in the advanced media classes, that's in the right now. So the advanced media course curriculum is not fully developed yet because we haven't offered it yet. This will be the first time, but it's in the intro class right now, media and social media. It's also in the sports media class too, thinking about reliability of sources and variety of sources and perspectives.
Awesome. And the last thing also in social studies, this is something that's important to me. How do you choose a curriculum to do that? I've been working and studying a lot with the Zen Education Project. It's a huge U.S. history based project. I really like their stuff, but I was wondering how you guys put together your curriculum. Is there certain Oh, do we not want to talk about it?
No, no, no,
Cynthia's
no.
like, "We're not
Cynthia
doing this."
Alexander, our assistant superintendent, led the curriculum review
Got it.
for
Okay.
the. No, you can talk. Cynthia led the curriculum review last year. It was about a year and a half. So K through 12 with all of the teachers involved. Some teacher leaders had more of a role in examining the curriculum,
Cool.
looking at it from a lens of equity. Also with the standards, they of course drive what we're doing in all of the grade levels at the high school, making sure that our succession of courses are supporting the standards and also a diverse perspective.
Awesome. Thank you.
All the way down to Kara. Okay.
I was also going to ask about ethics and journalism, if that is included in that class. So thank you so much for answering all the questions that were sent to you and for explaining a bit more about the graduation requirements in terms of the number of credits. And you mentioned that the students tend to go far beyond that minimum requirement. I'm curious if you have an average number of credits that if you keep track of that statistic, and that could be an interesting thing to see.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that in the last 2 years, what has just exploded is the availability of online classes. So we're seeing kids taking our student, there's a range of students, of course. One of our students who Lily mentioned has been accepted to an Ivy League school is someone who took 4 or 5 classes over the summertime. So those will count as credits. And so we haven't had a document that tracked the number of credits, but it wouldn't be hard to do that. I actually just did a transcript review just the other day of last year's graduating seniors to make sure every single student had taken the science classes that we wanted them to take, which is the succession of earth science to biology, and then either chemistry or physics or chemistry in the community. And so our class is small enough that we could do it by hand. So that's something that we could certainly track and then bring back to the board. I don't know what the average is, but when we were at 24, we also had students going above the 24 at that time. It just depends on how much. Kids with lots of study halls don't go well beyond that. Some of our kids who pack their schedules with classes go well beyond, but we really are talking to students too about finding that balance for their mental health, that when they don't have any breaks in the day can be challenging.
I was curious about the AP classes being for juniors and seniors here, because your rationale around the background information they need to know ahead of time makes a ton of sense. I'm curious how other schools get around that, because I have friends with kids that go to a variety of other schools, and they're taking AP classes as a freshman and a sophomore. Their bio class is an AP class. Like, how are they doing that? And does that, I guess the reason I'm asking is, does that put our kids at any sort of a disadvantage that when they're stacked up against a kid from, say, Scarborough High School, they've had the opportunity to take a lot more AP classes than our kids?
So the feedback that we've had from colleges and universities is the most important thing is whether we offer it or not. So I know that in Falmouth, they offer AP Geography, and that is their most common 9th grade AP class that they offer. That's a course that we don't offer here. And according to their staff that I've spoken to about that course in particular, my source is my next door neighbor is the guidance counselor there, which is quite helpful, is that there isn't as much prerequisite knowledge, say, for going into AP World. So for AP World History, it's really important that you have a solid foundation in our global studies class that all of our 9th graders take. So it depends on the course of what we offer. It's also not hard and fast. We have lots of students who have moved quickly through, say, for example, through the math curriculum. If they've been advanced and then in middle school and then they come in advanced, we put them in the place where they are in their learning. So we've had students, sophomore students in AP Calculus, because that's the right place for them. We have felt strongly about it. We used to have, when I first got here, we used to have the option for ninth graders to go straight into honors biology. And then they could have potentially taken AP biology as a sophomore. The problem is that they completely skipped earth science. And so then they never saw those standards, not at the high school level. And they got all the way to the science MEA and they had never seen any of that content because it doesn't come back around again, because they would have gone honors biology, AP biology, and then gone to chemistry or physics. And so we made that decision, and that was something that came forward to the board, feeling like with the NGSS standards that it was really important for our students to have exposure to and content understanding of all of those standards instead of kind of picking and choosing. Not every school has chosen to do that. So I think that's where the variables lie. But we've also had students go into AP, I'm trying to think of another example, AP music theory, something like that, where they have had extensive music learning outside of school and they're ready for that. Which, by the way, is one of the hardest classes that I think that I have seen. If you've ever seen AP music theory, it is very hard.
That doesn't seem like music at all, really.
It's like a language. That's what it feels like when you're in that class. It feels like learning a language.
Any other questions? I will say around the weighted grades, that was something that early on seemed strange to me, that we don't weight the different grades based on the level of the course. But I think, there are calculators to do it, right? I mean, as I've had a kid who's been looking at college things and recruiting and all those things, like you can figure out your weighted GPA.
Mm-hmm.
He could tell you both. He could tell you what it is on the transcript. He could tell you what it is weighted. So it's simple enough to figure out if you wanted to. And I think the rationale makes sense. If they're stripping all that away anyway, because they know people do it differently and they come sort of back to what are the classes and how are they doing. I think that's probably more important. I'm really interested to hear about the grading spans, the 90 to 100, 81 to 90, all of those I feel like probably have a bigger impact in how they're going out into competitively.
Mm-hmm.
I know our thing says what they are, but it's just such a we're compressing each grade
Mm-hmm.
to 7 instead of 10 points. I mean, it's my same issue that I had with the 1 to 4. There's just not a lot of distinction in those things. And I don't know. I'll be interested to hear how that research goes, because I think that would probably have more impact than the weighting of the grades, in my opinion.
I was just going to mention something about, and Jen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like when kids are applying to schools, that the colleges are looking at what they've taken for what their school offers, right? So they're not really comparing your kid to another kid at a school that had like a million APs that they could take as a freshman, so they look at it and really make that decision. And I think that's another reason they don't like the weighted grades, because they just want to see it the way it is, and then they can figure it out from there, kind of thing. Is that right?
Yes. Exactly. Because they're looking to see, you might have a 98 average and you never took any of our most challenging courses that we offer. And colleges will absolutely look at that. It's the transcript review.
All right. Do you just keep going? No.
No. That's Cynthia. I will be here for moral support. But
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. All right. So, actually, I think we're going to Jean first, right? Yeah. So 9B, update on the 23-24 district goals.
Okay, and that is on the canary shade of papers in front of you. As to recap, last end of August and then into September, the board had a conversation of which subset of goals that we wanted to tackle this year. So this is an update on that subset of goals. And if you look at there's some indicators related to goal 1, that all students experience a joyful learning climate that's safe, nurturing, and fosters curiosity. And that we would strengthen and align all social emotional supports and systems to meet the needs of learners. The first action strategy we looked at was to evaluate the effectiveness of improved new practices and structures and make some adjustments. So I have some feedback from each of our schools. In Durham, there was some summer professional development for responsive classroom, and they're continuing some follow-up with coaching and consultation from the trainer that did that a PD for us. There is summer professional development and professional learning time dedicated for 6-8 staff as well for responsive classroom and responsive advisory planning. And there is additional support for that during their PLC time. There's actually an establishment of a dedicated social emotional learning and SEL committee at the school, and the team is reviewing curriculum options and intervention structures while establishing implementation plans for the fall of 24. At Freeport Middle, they had 10 teachers attend the responsive classroom training in June. That was in conjunction with our Durham teachers, and they have a train the trainer model for PD at Freeport Middle, and during the school year, in order for teachers to receive training on that responsive classroom philosophies, that they continue support teachers who weren't at that initial training. During advisory, teachers do weekly responsive classroom or responsive classroom-like lessons, and I know when we did our board visitation learning experience, we saw some of that in action. They continue with education about mean, unkind, or bullying behaviors and proactively addressing them in advisory, wellness classes, or whole school or grade level assemblies. There's an increased opportunity this year for all 8th graders to continue using the ropes course. And there's educational opportunities for families to learn about challenges of early adolescence and how to support their kids. In 22-23, they tried that. Participation was low, so they're going to work on some other advertising to see if they can increase parent participation in those opportunities. At the high school, they partner with Valo to provide social emotional workshops for all our 9th and 10th graders, as well as we've trained our student leaders in 9th and 10th grade advisory leaders. There was a workshop in September for those kids, and then there was a second training in November and December. There will be a second activity during advisory for all 9th and 10th graders that occurred on December 13th. All students participated in their annual alcohol awareness during advisory in December, and a guest speaker from Choices Matter is going to present assemblies in January to students. They've completed 2 virtual meetings, one in person in December with one virtual and one in person in December with the JED Foundation to review the survey data from students and staff, and they've created some action steps in conjunction with the JED leadership team. They're continuing to utilize anxiety-reducing strategies in the classroom, and other kids work individually with counselors and social workers. And our library, track, gym, they're open, as well as our Zen room on select days are now open 4 days a week during advisory for all kids. At Mass Landing, there's both additional proactive, their daily mile, weekly SEL lessons, a bounce program and mentoring, as well as responsive strategies such as streamlined daily process for monitoring attendance, which has resulted in some calls at home from the principal, and also increase in communication for families who have chronic absenteeism. The hope is to improve daily attendance, as well as gradually contributing to decreases in chronic absenteeism. It was reported it was 21.7% last December, and it has improved to 16.3% this past December. So that's good news. Universally, all students and staff participate in the Daily Mile, and I will be sending an invitation to the board. Remember, we missed the learning opportunity at Mass Landing to do that because of school cancellation. I'll send that out. That's coming up, that we'll be able to participate in that later this month. Probably boots this time. Boots, mittens, hats, gloves, all those things, because we will be outside. So they're doing that. And that's when everyone's out and moving and walking. While implement to provide increased movement is also really an opportunity where there's been some lovely cross-school connections for kids and also for staff with some kids. Pairing identifies students with adult mentors, and there are about approximately 24 identified students who are, from this are invited to participate in a special program called Bounce, and that's where they really get to practice some of those SEL skills and strengthen connections. At Moore Street, there was a new model. They're participating in that new model for responsive classroom training. It's 3 days in the summer with additional follow-up. And the teachers report the value of this model with that addition of this actually in-class coaching and individualized follow-up, that has been very, very supportive for them. Our BCBA, our board certified behavior analyst, Betsy Davies, had provided some training regarding understanding different behaviors for classroom teachers during staff meetings. This has led to an increased understanding the function of behavior of students whose students might be challenging, a little bit challenging. The result is our response to intervention behavior, our RTIB caseload. The folks are better equipped to start plans and be successful in Tier 1. School counselors are constantly shifting and planning units based on what is identified as a need. It's moved from a model where there was a lesson plan, you go into the class and do the lesson. It's really now shifted to be based on the needs of the kids. At Pownell, again, we've got more. You're gonna hear a lot about responsive classroom, and they had 5 of their teachers that attended that district-wide training. There have been school-wide expectations. All staff are using common language. There are assemblies for kids with a continued topics such as growth mindset, habits of work, as well as celebrations of learning in the classroom. And then protocols and procedures have been refined and updated based on staff input. And they're also providing practical tips to parents in their Panther Press News. The instructional support department, there's been a needs assessment for special ed programs completed, bright spots and strengths were identified, as well as areas for growth, and a PD plan established. Staff can readily obtain, review, and get training and support on their plans, including support from the board certified behavior analyst to help with those complex plans. And schools have designated key staff to serve on their school threats assessment team, and they've received training to use the comprehensive school threat assessment guideline and risk assessment tool. Key staff have been trained. We have a grant-funded threat assessment case management software, and they have received that training. And you will see budget requests for upcoming year will continue to, will reflect our continued need to support our social emotional needs of our kids. Under that same goal, but objective, moving on to 1.3 strategic objective, it's to maximize student opportunities for physical movement and adequate breaks to allow students to refresh and recharge for learning. And if you'll notice there, those are indicators that we have not yet started. There are several indicators under there that we've not started documentation yet. If we move on to page 4, we'll move on to strategic. The big goal, number 2, is that all RSU 5 students regularly engage in meaningful student-centered learning. And you'll notice there, 2.1, that objective, review, research, and explore options for implementation of student-centered instructional practices, and we've not started the documentation of that. Strategic plan goal 3, all RSU 5 student parent community partnerships are based on strong communication and active involvement to support student success. And we're looking at objective 3.1 to expand avenues to proactively distribute information and seek feedback from stakeholders. Strategy 3.1E, there's some indicators there that we have. Our schools are using a variety of methods to communicate with families, including social media, newsletters, etc. Our budget brochure has been revised by the Strategic Communications Committee and the Finance Committee. You'll be seeing some changes this year. It's not the bones are not finalized, but we're getting closer, I think. And I've put my recommendation for this is that we engage in a strategic planning process with our communities, and there will be financial implications for 24-25 budget, and we'll talk about that at budget time. But I think that's really a great way to gauge our constituents. A strategic objective 3.3, encourage and support strong student-parent partnerships to enhance student success. And you look at, that's our 3.3D, that's implementing recommendations. You look at work at Durham, they're doing more targeted information with families, especially in grades 6 to 8. In addition, they have access available through Google Classroom. Their leadership team is looking at how do you make curriculum more accessible in the fall. And there's a range of curriculum support and how-tos offered for families, with both an evening option and a before-school option. And they now are offering math nights. Our Freeport Middle, they have their weekly announcements in separate emails from the office with important information. Their use of parent-teacher conference model. Parents selected, so they actually did a survey. Well, how would you like it virtual? Would you like it in person? And they found that parents wanted both, so they do a combo of that. And teachers will continue to reach out to parents each trimester. They're increasing phone calls, letters, meetings with parents and students who are chronically absent. And guidance is looking at ways to increase communication this spring with offering for parents, some offerings they want to have for parent education. And last year, their parent response was slow. So they're thinking about how they might do that differently. At the high school, we've hosted a parent workshop in the winter 2023, sponsored by Kyle's Cares about suicide prevention. There are frequent parent workshops that they're advertising through the guidance department for college selection, financial aid information. They've hosted seniors in the spring about mental health and transition work. The student leadership are expanding mental health resources, and they're sharing resources widely with students and families. The weekly high school announcements are shared with families about trying to be timely about the Freeport High School events, as well as there are links to resources about the high school. At Mass Landing, they're really hitting chronic absenteeism hard, lots of communication about that and the importance of school attendance. They've actually have a list of students at risk of chronic absenteeism and a cue to the principal to call the family when they're absent. There's a formal process for notifying families, and they're using refined attendance monitoring systems to invite families in to help develop a plan. On Moore Street, there's increased communication with families with tips and ideas for supporting how they can support their children at home. At Pownell, there's parent training to support students in their partner readers. They did it last year. It was really well received. They're doing it again this year. And there will be some virtual small group talks with school counselors. Again, they ran a series last year and it was successful, so they want to do it again. And instructional support. There's a parent professional learning series. It's being moved to spring 2024 in collaboration with the Maine Parent Federation. And there's also a partnership forming with Disabilities Rights Maine, which is a grant project to inform families and youth and families about self-advocacy. Strategic Goal 4, RSU5 has a well-developed and refined finance, facilities, transportation, and food service system to support with learning of all kids. 4.5 is strengthening community engagement. And you look at 4.5B, we're working on exploring, evaluate options for communication regarding our financial planning. Things that have happened so far. There was a meeting held with leadership from Durham, Freeport, and Pownell in December. The budget brochure has been reviewed multiple times, and the Strategic Communication Committee has discussed methods for how to disperse information to the public. The capital improvement plan is being revised. We'll reflect findings from our energy audit that's underway, and we also are revising our technology plan to better reflect our current needs. Making recommendations to the Finance Committee about planning. That budget brochure revisions were recommended will be forwarded to the Finance Committee for the final look. And then we look at 4.6. That's where we're looking at all our facilities are operating efficiently and effectively. 4A is conducting that energy audit. And so we had the process was requests for proposals were completed and energy consultants in Maine were selected. We had our kickoff meeting on December 18th to speak with them. And lighting portion actually began the week of December 26th. Lighting is done. They've almost done the envelope of the buildings, and they're well into ventilation already. So that's some extra things that I could add there as well. And then recommendations on what we're going to do with that. We're not there yet until we get the energy audit done. So far, in a nutshell, that's what we've done on the goals of the board. And happy to answer any questions.
I was excited to see the Freeport High School partnering with the Valo, as that was sort of an expansion on the small group that was sort of piloted, I guess, last year, which is incredible. And I'm really excited about that. But I'm also wondering about the 11th and 12th graders, because that was just for the 9th and 10th. So is there something that's sort of...
Gulko is still here. If you want to come and just talk a little bit about Valo.
So we introduced the 9th and 10th grade students to the Valo staff and some of the Valo activities, which is about checking in and connectedness on the days of our LL Bean trips in the fall. And so when they went to LL Bean, they were only there for half the day. And then the other half of the day, they were there with the Valo staff. We chose the 9th and 10th grades because they are the newest to the community and the least pushback in advisory, I would say, and where we're gaining momentum with our advisory student leaders. So they have had more energy, I would say, with planning things for advisory and coming together for activities. And they don't have open campus. So they have a little bit more incentive to plan something. But it's not to say that we wouldn't. We have done, we call them Valo check-ins, and we've had the Valo staff come, and we've done that twice with our whole staff. And so we've said to the whole staff, anybody can do this in their advisory. So we have certain days when we're doing it with the 9th and 10th graders. But for example, a couple of advisors did it today just because they chose to. So the 11th and 12th grade advisors who are familiar with it and comfortable with it can do it at any time that they want. It's just we're not having the whole grade level participate.
So my question was around the 1-3B, the physical movement one. It seems like the perpetual one that always seems to get sort of pushed. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the attainability of that one for this year still.
I think we can get started on it. I think to complete all those is quite ambitious, because to get done what we've done here, that's a lot and we know the administrative, the teams, the schools are doing that. So I think we'll get started on that for sure. But we'll not get down to 1-3D.
Totally understand. I feel like I recall checking, thinking that when I first saw, I'm like, geez, we're going to review and implement and change and decide if we like it all in 1 year. So it makes probably more sense that it gets spread out a little bit more. So who had their hand up? Cheyenne.
So I noticed that at Mass Landing, they had implementation about the chronic absentee. And I noticed that a few other schools have mentioned that as well. And I noticed that Emily Grimm had stats about where it was last December versus where it was this December. So I was wondering like what the other schools had in place to just make sure that it was going in the right direction.
I don't have their statistics on what they're doing, but they're certainly tracking by individual students on where that is, but I don't have that actual information to share.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. This is a lot. I was wondering about the responsive classroom changes and if you could speak to those or follow up at a later time to tell us, what the major shifts are and the new learning that's happening.
And I think the major shift is the model that we've had before, where before they would get the training and then they would go back. But now it's we have the trainer is doing some coaching on site, and there's some additional follow-ups from that trainer for staff. So it's more training and change in the model, delivery model for those teachers.
Thank you for the clarification. So the content is the same. It's just, okay, thanks.
But we are expanding it in the middle school levels, right? So responsive classroom is
Yes.
kind of growing in that way.
And we had a lot of staff that hadn't been trained in that at the middle level, and that's been a goal of the district for a while, and we were able to do that this summer.
All right. Any other goal update questions, comments? All right. Now it's Cynthia's turn. So we have the district scorecard.
I'm going to be projecting. Oh, this is not. Can you hear me? Is it on? We didn't check this one. It's all the way up. Okay. I'll speak right into the mic. Can you hear me okay? Okay. That screen is warming up. Okay. Good evening. In your purple folders, you'll find a few slides from the presentation, or I just put them on your in your spot. So you should have my slide presentation, and then you'll want to take out item 9C. They're paired together. So, and I'll help you coordinate that throughout the presentation. And thank you. I want to thank you for sharing your questions in advance. You will find that those are all answered. Oh, that's much better. Maybe it's me. I moved just right. They're all answered throughout the presentation. Okay. I will now take you through how the scorecard is organized, and page 2. So the scorecard is that 9C. That the one that was already in your folder. Page 2 starts with pre-K enrollment data. Next, we move to the K-5 Fontes and Pennell data on pages 3 and 4, followed by the state achievement data from the Maine through year assessment, which assesses reading and math in grades 3 through 8 and 10. Then you'll find our state science results from the New Meridian Science Assessment in grades 5, 8, and 11. Although I have no slides and not specifically to talk about grade 9 data, it is in your scorecard on page 11. Because this grade is not state tested, we continue to test them using the original MAP assessment for this last year. We chose to do that. And formally, we were able to show you how our MAP assessment, the MAP measure of academic progress, growth data as well. With the transition from the MAP to the Maine through year, there were many concerns in the field about the validity of the growth data because the test was designed in such a way that it only allowed for students to be asked questions up or down one grade level, thus creating a ceiling. Toward the end of the scorecard, you will find the PSAT, SAT, and advanced placement achievement data. And finally, on the last page, you'll see the graduation rates and the post-secondary data on page 18. Throughout the presentation, I will make references to the page numbers in the scorecard when appropriate so that you can look at the data points at the same time. Some of the data will not be talked about in as much depth. The purpose of this annual presentation is to take an academic look at our students and to notice and celebrate the learning achievements in RSU 5. Each school also receives an individual scorecard showing their own data. Principals use this information along at the building levels with their leadership teams, and they use those to create specific goals. The slide that's up there now is pretty self-explanatory. These are our achievement assessments. All students, so now if you want to follow along in the presentation slide, All students in K-5 are given the district-wide Fonnes and Pinnell benchmark assessment in reading. That's done through with our staff that is trained to do that. Beginning in FY23, all students are assessed in reading and math using the state's main through-year assessment in grades 3 through 8 and 10, or they usually define it as the second year of high school. This is required by the state to satisfy our federal reporting requirements. Each spring, all students in grades 5, 8, and 11 are assessed in science as required by the state. So this year was their second year of that assessment because it changed along with the one that we just changed. And then PSAT and SAT assessments are offered at FHS, but are no longer required by the state. Okay, so this chart, so this will be referenced to page 3 and 4 in your scorecard. This chart shows academic achievement. I wonder if we should turn the light a little bit. Would that be more helpful, or is everybody okay with the visual? Is it all right? Okay. Okay, so it's okay. All right. All right, this chart shows academic achievement data in reading for cohorts of students on the Fonnes and Pinnell benchmark assessment that was administered in the spring of 21, 22, and 23 to students in grades K through 5. So students are expected to meet a certain benchmark in reading at the end of each grade level. Let's locate grade 3 in the middle. So look at that middle section. In 2021, that's that leftmost column, only 30.9% of students met the benchmark. In 2022, now they're in grade 4, so you'll go to grade 4. That same cohort of students, 52.9% of those students met the benchmark. Are you following? Okay. And then in grade 5, that same group, 63.7% of those students met the benchmark. And these students are now all in grade 6. So I just wanted to take you through one example of how to follow the trajectory of the cohorts through. All cohorts made gains in achievement from the spring of 22 to the spring of 23, with the exception of last year's grade 2 cohort. Okay, the next slide. The next two slides are reflective of the main through-year assessment, which is an adaptive assessment. That would be on page 5 through 7. You may choose to, yeah, I just said that. Again, this is given in grades 3 through 8 and the second year of high school. It measures achievement according to a benchmark grade level of the Common Core standards. I also want to call your attention to the 2 subgroups in the district scorecard. Under the district total, you will see a row for the economically disadvantaged, followed by a row for the identified disability. If there is a cell where there's no data, then the data is suppressed, which indicates that there were less than 10 students in that group. Otherwise, that would be too identifiable. Regarding the economically disadvantaged students, this is a category that we are going to be taking off the scorecard going forward. I kept it in this year so that I could explain why. These numbers are no longer accurate because they are grossly underreported for several reasons. First, since COVID, all students are currently receiving free lunch and we're no longer able to ask families to complete the application. We are now a Provision 2 school district, so we are only using data that is, we are only using old data, and this highly influences our numbers. And secondly, as I mentioned last year, the federal and state are still struggling with the best way to quantify economically disadvantaged populations. As I've previously stated, Title I allocations are based on those numbers, and now we are using an interim formula based on previous year's data. So the state and the federal, they're still looking at how to best decide what to use to determine economically disadvantaged students other than this, and they haven't figured it out yet. So they've put in play a formula for a couple of years until they've got that figured out. So when you look at this, there are more students that in the old way of doing it would have been identified as economically disadvantaged. Therefore, more of those students would have met. So that's the point I'm trying to make. And then in this slide, you see 2003 results for the Maine through year assessment in reading. Because this is a brand new assessment, these numbers create our baseline for at least the next 2 years. These are very solid results. At this time, we do not have comparative data to the other districts at the state level because the state is delayed on uploading the 22-23 data to the ESSA dashboard. If you remember, after Emily presented her goals late in the fall, I had mentioned that the ESSA dashboard shows statewide results. And we have been told that, in fact, even today I was in a session that they expect the results to be in by the end of the month. And I can let Jean know when those are up and running and then provide the link, and she can send that in an update for you when they are available. I'm most anxious to see them as well, because that is really a nice way to make comparisons. On this slide, here are the 23 results for the Maine through-year assessment in math. Because this is a brand new assessment, these numbers will also become our baseline data. Of concern is the grade 8 and grade 10 data in math. We will be watching this data very closely in 24 and are looking to compare this to the state results when they become available. We will continue to monitor the 8th grade cohort. So there are 9th graders this year. Additionally, the first administration of the Maine through-year assessment in the spring of 2023 was an operational field test for the high school level and an operational test for all of the other grades. So in plain English, what that means is that the high school questions in math were not field tested questions. And all questions have historically been field tested to show how they behave. The psychometricians ask questions like, does this question act like it should? Because questions are supposed to act a certain way. That's why they field test them. Does this question have bias? There are multiple questions that they ask. They didn't do that ahead of this testing. So basically, they had field test questions during this actual administration that were not tested. So as a result, there's concern across the state regarding the high school math results, causing the Maine DOE and NWEA, that's the vendor, to review the math questions that were particularly low scoring, revise those questions to be field tested in spring of 2024, and then review the new data to determine whether the revised questions should be operational in the spring of 25. In the spring of 24, there will be an increased adaptivity for the assessment as the summative question bank expands. Okay, on this slide, we're going to move to science. So this will be page 8 in the scorecard. I'll let you get there. The spring of 2022 was the first administration of the New Meridian assessment, which assesses the next generation science standards. If you remember last year, we did not have our data ready and available to us for this presentation. So you're going to see both years. It's important to note that this slide does not show cohorts of students, as it's only offered in grades 5, 8, and 11. The third column compares our spring 23 scores, so that middle column, to the state average. So we did perform better than the average of the state at each grade level. So that's a celebration. But we are concerned that our 5th and 11th grade data is not higher, even though we outperform the state. I would also like to point out that we have just begun our professional development work on the next generation science standards, and that in 2020, we were right in the middle of doing that work. And then on March 13th, the day that we all got the messaging, that was actually of COVID, that was actually one of our professional development days that we were having right at the school in science. And so that came to an abrupt halt. And then in that fall, for those of you who weren't on the board at that time, the board made the decision based on other things that happened in June and nationwide that we were going to move to social studies and work on the social studies curriculum, which we just completed last spring. So we are currently now working with the Maine Math Science Alliance, doing great PD work with grades 3 through 6. And we also have begun the work at the high school this year. So we expect to see those results improve year over year. So that work is probably going to take us this year and next year. Okay, slide 8. I'm sorry, I don't mean to say slide 8. I mean, please refer to page 13 in the district scorecard for slide 8. I would like you to take out your pens or pencils and add the following information to the right side of your scorecard because there was an omission. There should be an extra column to the right and title it state percentage because we do have the state percentage of that. And let me get that for you. So this would be the page that has the SAT, page 13, it should be in your scorecard. Let me get it to you. Okay. So you're going to title that right to the right of your 22, 23 percentages. So you see where it says 75.2% for this ELA? Everybody with me? Okay. So to the right of that, you're going to put 71.0%. That was the state percentage. And then just drop down to where to math, where it has that 38.6. And the state average was 38.0. This kind of lends into one of the questions, and I realized that piece was missing. So there are no state proficiency levels for SAT. As a reminder, in 2020, the SAT was canceled due to COVID, and since then, it's no longer been a state-required assessment. Additionally, a high percentage of colleges are no longer requiring an SAT. So on this slide, in 2021, even though it was no longer required, that first year, all of the 128 students took the SAT. In 22, 87.5% of our students took the SAT. And in 23, this last spring, 93% of our students still took the SAT. In 2023, 75.2% of our 11th grade students who took the SAT met or exceeded the benchmarks in ERW is what they call it, and that stands for English Reading and Writing on the SAT, as compared to the state average of 71%, which I just gave you that number. And I have the national number as well, which is 52%. I see a question in the field. I don't know what that score is. I can get you that information, but I don't know off the top of my head what that score is. It just it's a separate kind of. I didn't think to. Sorry, but I can get that for you. And let's see. So the national average was 52%. If you wanted to write that down in addition, we don't use, but that is a national test. And then in 2023, 38.6% of our 11th grade students who took the SAT met or exceeded the benchmarks in math, as compared to the state average of 38.0%. And the national average, 30%. This data comes straight from College Board, again, because it's no longer a state mandated test. So it's not our state who sets these benchmarks. It's this College Board that sets the benchmarks, because there's no proficiency level. Do you remember, if you remember back a ways, it was because it was a state assessment, there was all this work done, and then there was a way to attach it to a proficiency level. And that is no longer the case. It's just they've met the College Board benchmarks. So does that explain a little more? I can get you that information. Okay, the next slide. We're going to refer to page 14 in the scorecard. This slide shows 6 years of data at the high school regarding advanced placement classes. AP is just a shortened version of that. AP classes provide great learning, strengthen transcripts, and provide ability to experience the rigor of college classes. The highlight here is that 147 of our students were enrolled in AP classes last year, as compared with an average of just under 133 students over the prior 4 years. In FY23, 74.2% of the students who took at least one exam passed at least one test. And in 2022, this figure was 21% higher than the US total. We don't get the figure. The reason there's a blank there is because we don't get that figure until April each year. And of all the tests taken in 2023, 70.9% had a score of 3 or better on a 5-point scale. And for those of you who don't know, a 3 is, for most colleges, considered passing. Some classes, it might be a 4 that they would accept it. Okay, the next 3 slides can be referenced on page 18 of the scorecard. The high school graduation rate examines the percentage of public high school students who graduate on time. And by definition, these are students who start in 9th grade and graduate in 4 years. We were, in 23, we were at 97.2%. The state of Maine graduation rate for 2023 is 87.3. And for 22, as a reminder, I shared this last year, it was 86.14. And these are state averages. And then the year prior was 86.1. And I just like to put a plug in, as I always do, for Boost. The Boost Committee, AKA the Dropout Prevention Committee, meets regularly to look at students who are at risk. And our goal is always to have 100% graduation. And that's always going to be the goal. Yeah, so if you could, on the cover sheet, on the cover page of your scorecard is the same graphic that just shows since 2016, since I've been here, those are our graduation rates over time. Okay, the next 2 slides are also on page 18 in your scorecard. Reflect the data about students enrolled in college immediately after high school. In the class of 22, 69.5% of our graduating class went on to secondary education in either a 2 or 4-year program. We don't receive the 2023 cohort data again until late April. And the latest data we have for the second year students, so these are the students that went the first year. From those students, this is the second year data. The latest class we have the data for second year students enrolled in post-secondary is for the 2020 class. The chart shows that 62.5% of the class was still enrolled in the second year, or about 80 of the 128 students persisted to a second year. And for the visual learners, remember that graduates are counted as attending for all 4 years. So if you look at that first row in 2020, our graduation rate was 97%. So of those students, 73.4% entered a 2 or 4 year college program. And then in the fall of 2020, the 62.5% of the graduating class were still enrolled. So that's just a different way to look at the same thing I just shared in the last 2 slides. And after graduation, what next? So this slide, there's nothing in the scorecard, although the data comes from the guidance. Some comes from the scorecard, but some comes from guidance because they do surveys and students self-report what their plans are going forward. So this slide shows that our students were planning what they're planning on doing after graduation for the classes of 22 on the left and 23 on the right. It's a visual look with actual and some self-reported data. In 2022, the pie chart on the left, you'll see 75.2% enrolled in college or another 2 to 4 year program that I mentioned 3 slides ago. And then in 23, 71.3% enrolled. The rest of the data on the pie chart, which includes military, employment, a gap year, is all self-reported and collected from the guidance office at FHS. So they do a really good job. I've already seen the survey that was sent out from the guidance office. It recently came out. So they're already starting to collect that data. And that is the conclusion of the scorecard presentation. So I've embedded in my presentation the questions that I received ahead, and I hope that was helpful. Are there others?
Questions? This is always a lot of data, which I love,
Yes,
but it's a lot.
It is a lot, and it's a lot. It's a lot for us to pour through, and like this is the district picture, and each school pours through their individual scorecard data, and then we also have, just as another piece of information, we also have we break down like the gifted and talented data, which I don't have with me tonight, so don't ask me. But we do have a scorecard for that as well. And I can tell you about that what my expectation would be that 100% would be meeting standards in every place. And it was true with one exception in one area. So I was pleased to see that most of them would exceed, because it kind of speaks to a lot of things, the instruction they're getting, the identification process, and so on. So, and then we look at special ed, and special ed has their own scorecard as well. So there are multiple scorecards that we look at. Our scorecards even have more of a breakdown at the individual school level. We keep those confidential because there are other identifying categories that we look at. We look at race and the economically disadvantaged is not, like I said, going to be looked at, but we look at a few other categories but the numbers are so small that we would never want to make those public. But it's good to look at, are there trends or things that we need to be mindful of?
Great. Yeah, Karen.
Thank you. This is great. This is really useful. Thank you. I actually really do love numbers. So.
Can I just grab my water?
Yeah, please do. And this question is just, it's really broad. It's just something that has never crossed my mind before until I saw it. We don't have military recruiters in the school, do we?
So I'm going to ask Jen, because I don't have the knowledge of that.
Okay.
But Jen's nodding yes.
Okay.
And we do have an obligation to provide information
Yep.
to federally. So, but I'll let Jen more knowledgeable about speaking to that.
So tall. Yes, we have military recruiters from all of the branches that come, but they have either they have an information session that students are able to sign up for and attend, or they have a table at lunch where they are distributing information, and the students come up to the table to speak with them if they choose to do that.
Okay. I gotta think about that one. Thank you.
So that's the same as the colleges that come to the, yeah. Okay. So can I ask, and I know these, I mean, they're statistics, right? So there's a variety of things that could change year to year. So when I look at the Fontes and Pinnell, this is in your presentation. Yeah. So page 1, 2, 3, page 4.
Yep.
4 of your presentation. Am I reading it correctly that if I start in spring of 21 with grade 1, 62% were meeting the standard. When those same kids were in grade 2, they dropped to 33%. And then when they were in grade 3, they are inched back up to 40.9.
You're correct. And I think, I'm trying to think if that was, so 21 would have been, okay, let's see. So spring of 21. Well, I'm thinking about COVID and hybrid year is what I'm going
Yeah, so
back
spring
to.
of 21 was the hybrid year, right?
Yeah. So that would have been 62. Yeah.
See, this is where you can take
Yeah,
statistics
so
and
this
make
is
them say
where-
whatever you want, right? And be like,
No.
look, COVID was good for our kids. They
No.
did twice as good on their reading assessments.
Actually, we found that ironically, the math was better. I don't know if you remember that. It's oddly enough.
I thought it was the reading because they were in smaller groups with the and half the kid with the
Yeah.
teacher only had half the kids in front of her to do
And
the-
so this is where you have to look at the different schools, the different kids, the granular level,
Yeah.
right? So I can't tell you the detail behind, but that this is the right data. This is accurate data. I
Right.
can tell you that. Like that group in grade 1 went from 62 to 33.6%.
Interesting.
And then they went back up to 48, 44. Excuse me. They went to 40.9. So that's this year's current 4th grade.
Right. It's just, just pops out as,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big drop.
Yeah.
But I presume that
And
when you
that's-
guys all look at these at a school level, that's what you're looking for. And then you're digging in further to see what's going
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of on the similar vein, I'm just curious, like what the threshold percentage might be where you would be looking at a grade like grade 3 in 2021, and then
So
their
at
scores
each-
in 2022 where you would say, oh, wait a minute, that's a significant change.
So
If-
just for people who don't understand the assessment, so there's a reading component, there are questions, there's comprehension, and there are different levels of comprehension, and then there's fluency. That's all part of that. And so that assessment in grade, K, they have to be at a certain level, like they have to go to a D, and then they have to be like at a J in first grade. That's a lot. First grade has a huge band, like the biggest band of growth, right? And then there's like 2 or 3 levels. So I just want to give you that background. So Malik, can we go back to what your question is?
Yeah, so
just to give
I
everybody
guess,
that context.
A fluctuation of a couple percentage points
Mhm.
probably is
Right.
normal from year to
Mhm.
year. So I guess I'm just wondering what that percentage point would be where you would kind of pause and look at the data and say, oh, this is a more significant fluctuation.
That would
or
definitely be a
difference.
place to do that.
Yeah, yes, clearly that is.
You
But,
know-
if it's a 2%, I'm assuming
Okay.
you're not. That's just a
So for
normal
me,
fluctuation.
yes.
but
For-
if maybe
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
it's
So
5%. Where
Oh,
you would
or
look,
less.
or-
Yeah, like that would be at bare minimum, right? Like because and the other thing is like if you look at Pownell, it could be 1 or 2 kids percentage, right?
Yep.
Whereas at Moore Street, you're going to have 1 or 2 students aren't going to change the percentage a great deal, and you always have move-ins and move-outs. There's lots of variables. So that's where the level of work at the school in the leadership team and looking at the data and what did all the kids miss? Was it the comprehension questions? What did they miss in kindergarten? Or what did they miss during the hybrid year? Like these are all questions that would be asked at a school level, and they would put in play a way to ramp that up so that they would move in the next year. So and I've seen this work in action, and it's really comprehensive, and all schools are doing that. I can assure you that. And if you want to get a good sense of that, you can go into schools. I know a lot of you went to Moore Street to see, and I'm using Moore Street because this is that was the K2 book, this board visit. I think many of you went to that and were able to see those things in play. So that's why I love our curriculum, because you talk about the science of reading. I'm going to put it out on the table. We are using the science of reading, and we are responsive, and we've been ahead of that curve all along, and we're putting in play ahead of time things that we see. We're responsive to kids and the kids that are in the room in front of us. And that's really what we should be doing. And so I know that the schools are doing that work with their leadership teams. But to answer the question in a simple way, 5% would be, for me, it would be like, that's too much. So 1%, and again, it depends on, is it one child or is it, what makes the percent change? Yeah, you're welcome. Laura.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I have
You're
a few
welcome.
questions, and
Sure.
I didn't send them in advance, so I totally understand if they're ones that you can't answer
Okay.
right on the spot. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I've heard some things about Fontes and Pinnell and its reliability and other options, and so I'm just wondering your thoughts on that, or Jean, your thoughts on that, and then what we use and what else is out there, and how long we've been using Fontes and Pinnell, and if we'd considered using anything else.
I'm going to go grab my pen.
Okay.
Some of what you've asked, I can respond to, and others I can dig into. So Fontes and Pinnell, I don't know how long we've used it, but we've used it since before I was here. So this is 8 years. So at least that amount of time. So I can tell you about the administration of Fontes and Pinnell. We've gone through, so doing the assessment in the spring is a big undertaking. This is not, the more standardized you get on any assessment, the better off and the more reliable your assessments are. So when you have something that's nationally normed, there's more reliability to it, right? So in the state test, there's more reliability to it in comparison to other things, because the administration is the same, the directions are the same, all of that. The administration of this should be the same, but when you have teachers coming in, and teachers are doing this, right? Classroom teachers are doing this assessment. We've done different models. We've done assessment teams that have gone in and done the assessing. We switched the model in K2, I would say 4 or 5 years ago, because when students would move from one grade to the other, what the new teacher saw didn't necessarily match. Like if they thought they were a level J and they were coming in at a G or something like that. And so we've done a lot more training, and we've got trained, we have an assessment team that's trained. We do calibration every year, every spring on the K2 level. So we feel our data is getting more and more reliable in that way. It's another measure. Like, we don't have state assessments at the K1-2 level for good reasons, right? And there are other assessments and observations in the classroom that are as reliable. We have examined others. We've had a committee together, I think 3 years ago, and we had people come and present their assessments, benchmark assessments, and we evaluated them. We used a rubric to evaluate them. So yes, we've done some of that work. So is it perfect? I I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's getting better so that when teachers are receiving the incoming students, it's more spot on. You could get a summer slide, but you don't get that much of a summer slide. If you assess them again after 3 or 4 weeks back in school, they kind of come back to where they were. And then when you assess them again at 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, the assessments are still done by the classroom teachers and instead of a team. So that I'm just trying to give you some history. And yes, is it perfect? No. Are we always looking to see if there's something that we could use better? And maybe you can tell me more about, you heard it isn't, like, what's behind you heard it isn't reliable.
I've heard that sometimes it doesn't catch dyslexia because
it doesn't.
The way that the screenings, that sometimes kids who have very good reading comprehension, but not very good decoding skills, can seem like they are better at reading than they really are. And I've just heard some concerns from parents about.
Okay,
about
that's
that.
helpful
Yeah.
because it's not a dyslexia screening tool. We have dyslexia screening tools, and that's relatively newish. When I was a principal, and even before that, and that was just not something that schools did, diagnosed with that, right? So it's relatively newish, but we have screeners now for that. But this is not that tool.
Right.
If that's what you're looking for, so I'm glad I pushed on that question because this is not a tool for that.
Thank you.
But can I just, Celeste, so we screen for dyslexia, but this is not
Yes.
the tool we use.
Yes.
And when you mentioned the different letters, I know Dr. Sellers said we're sort of moving away from those. Are kids going to be classified in a different way through the screener, or will they still get the letter? Am I misremembering that?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. I
So-
didn't think we were doing the J and the different letter assignments anymore, but I could be wrong.
Oh, I can tell you. I think I can address that. When we did that walkthrough, you were at the walkthrough, right? We used to, like, in classrooms, the boxes would be packaged that way. They're no longer, they're set out more by theme and interests versus the letters, but we still are assessing where they are.
Using it for that.
Yes.
But I'd also say when instructionally, the teachers know. So the teacher's pulling a small group together. I know, that this is the instructionally right level for the group of kids. So the teachers know they're doing that, but it's not so much that. So if teachers say, "Hey, a kid would say, I'm a J," they don't know that, but the teachers know instructionally where they are.
Okay. I totally know what you're talking about because I'd seen those boxes before. So
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
I will say, just from personal experience around the Fontes and Pinnell assessments with a child with a learning disorder, it actually helped pick it up because she had very good comprehension and her fluency was trash. And they were like, we don't know why. We couldn't they couldn't figure out why one was, she was great, and then the other it wasn't, and they kept digging in to try and figure it out, and actually the OT did, and got us hooked up with someone to get it identified, and so actually that test is, because of the difference where they break it down between comprehension and fluency and the other pieces of it, help discover that there was an issue. It wasn't dyslexia, but which I thought was very interesting and super helpful for me because I probably wouldn't have picked up on it. Colin.
This is super helpful. I'm wondering, and I'm sure it varies based on the test and the subject and the grade, but I'm looking at the science New Meridian data. I don't remember what page that is, but it's this page. And I'm just looking at I'm looking at the grade 5, and I'm just wondering, how do we use this information in terms of understanding, I guess, a sort of collection of things, like whether there's a misalignment with the curriculum that we've chosen to use, that is just not for whatever reason. It's not aligning with what
Mm-hmm.
this particular test is picking up on. Or are we looking at the numbers, for example, of like the 30.1 for grade 5 in spring
Mhm.
2023 and saying, okay, we need to look at the way the curriculum is being taught
Mhm.
and how well the grade 5 teachers are trained
Mhm.
to deliver that? Or are we looking at it more as an indicator of like, all right, in grade 6, all right, grade 6 science teachers, like you got your work cut out for you because of
Mhm.
because of what we've been seeing in terms of the achievement.
Okay, so that's a lot right there. So I feel like it would be helpful if I gave you a little bit of backstory to all of this. So prior to the next generation standards have been in play for a while and in here, but they weren't being assessed 100%. Over time, they threw in some next generation questions. This is for everybody to get the backstory in these science assessments. And now it's full on. So these last 2 years are full on all next gen standards. Another piece of information, science in 3rd through 5th in the last couple of years has not been the strongest of priorities for, let's just say, literacy and math have been heavily weighted for obvious reasons. And in some areas, in schools have different amounts of time for content. And we're trying to work on that. So that's an issue. That's a factor. And we are right now in the process of aligning with the next gen standards, our curriculums, and we're working with, like I said in the presentation, Maine Math Science Alliance. I can tell you that when I first came here, the science before COVID, Durham got like the award for the highest in the state. Like we were there, right, at one point. So it's very doable, but things have been reprioritized in the short run, and we now are going back to tackle this. So it's not about 5th grade. It's about 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, right? And it's not about 6th grade playing catch up either. It's really about let's look at the standards and own our standards. What phenomena can we use? Because they don't really even have an understanding of what a phenomena is and how to attack that, right? And they're great teachers, but we're really doing a lot of PD around that and how to go deeper with a phenomena and make it so it's relevant for them in this area. So that's some of the work we've been starting this year. We started in August. So my expectation that is year over year, you're going to start seeing that go up. I know you will. I'm confident about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's super helpful. I guess I'm just curious, like, at what point do we start to say, all right, these science scores are in this band for this cohort, and that's going to have an impact on middle school, high school achievement because of what we're seeing here. Like, at what point, how do we sort of I guess adjust for that or sort of take that into consideration?
So thinking back to some, prior years, you can't follow cohorts. However, if you wait until this 5th grade class is in grade 8 and look at it, I would say it's probably going to have the same look as it has right now in 8th grade, and it may be dipped down again in high school for a variety of reasons. Jen, I don't know if she's gone. Well, the only reason I was gonna defer to her was
let's call her. Get the phone.
No. She needs to go. So we've been working with science here too, and we have somebody else working with the high school. And Jen had shared with me prior to us starting this work this year that her science department has really done a lot of work, like in this area in the last year. So I'm assuming, and not assuming, I am projecting that again in a couple of years, you're going to really start seeing, because they love their craft and they're like really, and they've been really engaged in the work that we've been doing with Phenomena. It's just a whole other way to look at. I mean, that would be a cool thing for everybody. Do you all know what I mean by a phenomenon?
I was going to say,
Yeah.
I have no idea. I'll throw myself under the bus here. I have no idea.
Yeah. So, I'm not prepared at length to like put out there anything wonderful in this minute in time, but there could be like
Jen's back if you want to make her do it.
No. Oh, so science at the high school. So I was sharing about the work we're doing at the high school and about Phenomena, and that's a piece that we haven't really hit on at any of the grade levels, and we're starting to. So I don't know if you want to. You don't know what I said, so
Talk about phenomenon-based units.
yeah, or any.
Okay, sure.
Or anything you feel that's been happening in the last 6 months to a year.
Okay.
With science, how
Great.
that would be better.
So we have, sorry if this is repeating. So we have partnered with a coach from Great Schools Partnership. She's wonderful. Erica Wallstrom, her background is in science education, which is huge. And so she has been working with the science team to think about how they are not just implementing the standards, but what that looks like in the units in terms of exploration in a different way. And so phenomena-based units are really starting with some sort of phenomena in science in the universe, and you're trying to figure out what makes it that way. And so we did an activity with her, for example, where all the science teachers were doing this, and it was talking about a runner who had passed out, and thinking all the way through what had happened to that runner. What had they eaten before, during, after a race? And these are the type of things that we do with students to get them thinking, instead of just talking about complex carbohydrates over here and your respiratory system over here. It's thinking about, how do you do this in something in the world that exists in science? And so there are some things that we have already done. Our biology teachers, for example, frequently use case studies. And so I was in a biology class the other day where they were talking about a child who had a significant illness, and the doctor's trying to figure out and weed out all the reasons of what had made this child ill. And so some of the things we're able to adapt and say, okay, so how do we put this more on the students instead of the teacher leading it, that they're really trying to dig through this phenomena-based situation. And then there's other units where we really have been, I would say, more old school, where we're presenting something like plate tectonics and earth science and how the earth shifts, when we're starting to think about having them explore Mount St. Helens and what happened, and doing that previous to these notes and things like that. So it's just a different way of thinking about using the standards in a way that a scientist would think. And so we have partnered with Erica for the year. So she's been working with department meetings, with our professional learning days, and doing multiple things, looking at all the standards, because our goal is for every student to experience every standard in NGSS, and making sure that their course trajectory does it. That's what I was just saying about earth science to bio to chem, or physics or chem in the community, and then thinking about the units that go with it, and then teachers collaborating to make sure that kids have common curriculum, common assessments, things like that.
Thank you.
No, that's great.
Don't go far, because
That was
everyone's
great.
hand just went up, Jen.
Yeah.
We'll start down this end this time. Kara. You had a,
Something different.
did you have a question?
Mine
What-
kind of was related. I was just gonna say that is really cool.
Yeah.
That is a really, really cool idea.
In the fourth grade, the 3 through 6, the one they were working on was erosion, and there were pictures that were projected, and you had to look at what caused that. Why is this big rock here? And you had to look at the surroundings, look at Google Map, and it just starts your thinking, and and the conversations. And I can say that a couple years back when we started the science, we had some PD in over at the Hilton Garden Inn, and it was on sound. And the steps that we went through as we were learners, students in this session, it was a 4th grade unit on sound. And the steps that we went through, you could have not known anything about science at all and felt everybody was engaged, everybody. And like, I left there on such a high, right? Like with this whole process about how to hook people. Because I have a grandson who doesn't love science, and I feel like it's the saddest thing on earth. He's graduated from high school and he doesn't love science. And who cannot love science? You know, and so I'm like, oh, if you could just do a redo and have like this kind of, you know, education. But anyway, so it's phenomenal.
Thank you, Cynthia. I
Yes.
find this presentation super helpful.
Okay.
And when I was reading the packet that was sent to us, I spent a lot of time looking at the data because I also really like to look at data
Yeah.
and numbers, and I like to be able to interpret and analyze it. And I felt really stuck on how to interpret the data. And having been through this last year, I remembered, oh, right, I don't think I'm looking at this right. I don't think I'm analyzing this right. So I'm wondering if it's possible next year to add a little bit of that context to the packet that is sent to us, just to remind us how, or give us some guidance on how to interpret it ahead of the meeting. Because it's really helpful for you to walk us through it in person. But for me, I like to come prepared, having a little more of an understanding. And I don't know if that would be helpful for anyone else, or if that would just be for me. If it's just
I
for
will
me,
note
then
it.
no. But
I can say to you that so I understand that, because I like, you want to have like my head wrapped around everything before I go in, right? Because that's how you engage in any PD, right? You want to be as prepared as you can. And but I can say that a few years back we set up, you know, like, when would we do the scorecard? Because data comes in all year long. AP comes in here, that all these data points come in at different places. And even right up till this afternoon, I make edits to my presentation. But I think what you're asking though is a couple of paragraphs around, you know, these you can follow the cohorts, and here's what you look at, like those kinds of things. But in terms of the presentation, it's like, there's like, Paula and I were on the phone like for the last couple of weeks. I did this in December. I was ready. And I said, if something happens to me and I die, all my stuff is here. You know, I always say that, right? I always think like that, right? So Jean, it's here in case, you know. But then I always make revisions, right? All the time up until the end. And so I just wanted to couch it in that. But I think what you're asking is for a little on the scorecard, be noticing these things. Okay, I'll make good efforts to try to.
I appreciate that. I know that's a little more work on your part, but it would probably be the same thing every year that you could include. It's just how how it's laid out.
All right. The only problem is the data is changing, because it's like, oh, well, we don't have background data on this because they changed the test again. Big surprise. So like, that's part of the struggle, is it's never, you know, I've done this a bunch of times, and every time I have to rethink it, because like, oh, we can't go back. We can't follow the cohort for this one, but we can for that one, but we can't. So, I mean, that's the struggle with these every year, but I appreciate the effort.
Yes.
Danielle.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Like, and looking at the SAT data, I mean, why? What are we missing, or what could we do different, I guess, in math?
Yeah.
I mean, what is everyone missing though?
Well,
really,
that's the
right?
thing.
Because the
It's
state, the national, like, what's
Yes.
the stand? Like, that was why my question was like, what are they expecting? Like, what's the
Yes.
benchmark? Because everybody's missing.
I would love that information myself, like, you know, because that is a fair and question that we all have, because I can't imagine there's one school that's getting 90%. And if they are, well, I'm going there to find out what they're doing that we're not. But, you know, I can tell you, I told you about the math at the high school level, right? So that's on them, right? That they were so upset with what they saw for the data that they're working with the vendor on why are the results the way they are. Because we're taking something that was a map assessment and using some of those kinds of things. Oh, the other part is there's a ceiling, right? So when we were doing the map assessment just as a map assessment, so that's the same vendor, but as you get higher and higher in the grades, the growth that you're expected is much smaller. Well, and then if you're hitting a ceiling because you can only go up one grade level, right? Like that's why I was like, I'm not doing this growth data because it's just, nobody got above like 10 to 15% in the growth data. Well, that's just not accurate. That's not what that's not, but you're talking about the SAT, right? Were you talking about the SAT?
I mean,
Or
you can
both?
kind of look back at everything, but
Yeah.
that just caught my eye. I mean,
Yeah.
30%,
Yeah.
that's like, I mean, English at 75% and math, I kind of would have thought it would have been the other way around.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know if there were things that we should be doing
Yeah.
to change that, in the high school. I mean, it sounds like, from my experience with, my own child at the high school, I mean, she's taken a lot of math. I think she's gotten a lot out of the math. I don't know how else you would fix that, I guess.
Right. No, that's a question that we all have and are pursuing.
So College Board, can you go in and look? So like, could we go and pick out the school in Limestone and see what their percentage of SAT attainment on the math is?
I don't know. I'll have to look.
Like if they're at like 50%, I don't think there's a chance for any of us, right?
That's a great question. I'll have to ask Paul. Because I can get in to College Board and I can see our kids' scores. And then, but I can't see anybody else's, but I'm trying to think I'll ask Paula and I'll get back to you on that. So
send you down the SAT rabbit hole.
SAT. I'm going to write that rabbit hole. Okay. How are other schools doing in math?
And what the
In
benchmarks
Maine.
are.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I can actually shed a little light onto your question. One of my degrees is in math. I did a whole bunch of studying in different countries around the world, and a lot of the kids I graduated school with were not from the United States. The two best countries, granted, this was more than 10 years ago, so things could have changed. However, at that time, students from Japan and students from Kazakhstan, hands down, they came in, they understood math from a completely different level and a completely different learning environment. The one that I liked best for learning kind of the basics was how they teach math in Japan. That's something I can, if it's something that's interested, I could bring in just kind of certain examples of stuff that they do. For example, the way they teach multiplication is way easier and makes way more sense. And it also makes moving on to the next step of, if you're going to move to calculus, you're going to move to multivariable or diffie-q. It makes that jump easier. I can't say exactly what it is about our system but it's a common problem. It's everywhere. But they have figured out how to teach math from the beginning in other countries. And I think we're just going to have to probably do a little more research and adoption of different things as a nation. However, obviously, between the 10 of us sitting here, I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, no, we got this. We totally got this. We're just going to have to go over to the other side of the world. But we totally got this now. But yeah, so it's so there are ways. It's just going to involve a more inclusive attack plan.
All right. Any other comments or questions for Cynthia?
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on to item 10. So the Finance Committee cost sharing presentation. So if you didn't have enough numbers in your head from Cynthia's presentation, we're just going to throw a few more at you. No, so one of the things that the board had asked back in the spring after Suzanne presented to us in February, and then the full board sort of discussed those findings back in May, and there were some questions around that they would like the Finance Committee to come forward with. So not necessarily a recommendation from the Finance Committee, but just a little bit more information and a little bit more data, both around how it was, how sort of what this process has looked like, as well as some specific questions around Suzanne Bowden's presentation back in February of last year. So I don't know. Do you want to? Do you want to kind of go through what we provided them, and
As far as this packet or the questions?
I would start with what we gave them from the packet.
Packet?
Just
Okay. All right. So we'll just go through the packet real quickly. Obviously, the first thing is our the Finance Committee came up with this cost sharing 101 document to basically try to clearly explain how our cost sharing works currently. And so that goes through, I mean, I know you guys have probably all looked at this. And then we have the presentation from Suzanne Bowden, which has all of her slides and information regarding potential changes or where she got her data, things like that. And then we also included the our own board budget impact summary to I'm not sure why.
so we included because the presentation that we gave you guys in May of last year had the previous year's budget information and kind of a line by line on like where the information comes from that summary, as well as the ED 279, which is the state document that lays out required local contribution,
okay, so that's just the updated budget summary and ED 279, which we had given you in the previous
back in
packet
May
as well. Okay, that's what it was. And then the last couple of pages are some of the scenarios that when we had the discussion in May, we were asked to kind of plug some numbers and come out with, kind of figure it all the way out, how it would impact each town if we were to change the cost sharing formula. And so that's about it on that. So, I mean, does anybody have any questions specifically in regards to this information that we've given you so far?
So,
Carolyn.
Carolyn.
I just have a very basic question, having never seen this before, except for when I was reading. So the RLC is that's raised from the community, or is that tax? Is
So
that
the
tax?
RLC is given to us, like it's figured by the state, and then it's told to us. So it's each town has a required local contribution that they have to raise in order to receive the subsidy from the state. So we don't have control, well, except for our cost sharing formula. We have sort of two RLCs. And that is, I think, did we discuss that? No. Is that the one we were talking about? And it
So
doesn't
legally,
have it on here.
the required local contribution per the state is what you would find on the ED 279, and that says
And that is, so if we go to the ED 279, is it here?
I don't think we have it laid out because it's not what we
It
use in
is.
our
Yeah, no,
calculation.
right here.
Yeah, but that's equalized mill.
Oh,
This is it is on there. It's on the second page of the ED 279. So the ED 279 is this colored sheet here that's got like multicolored lines. If you go to the second page of that, section 5, down the bottom, this is actually the adjusted required local contribution per the state. So if you went to the state and said, hey, what is Freeport's required local contribution? It's at the bottom of section 5 there of the ED 279. To keep it interesting, we decided to use the same terminology in our reorganization plan to say that our required local contribution is the previous page back to section 4 in section B. So the state says required local contribution per the state is they take your valuation and they multiply it by the required mill rate. So they say every town in the state has to raise $7 per mill. Per thousand, and in order to qualify for state aid. And so we say that required local contribution is the valuation per the 279 times that required mill. Technically, it's the lesser of a couple of numbers, but in ours, for equity's sake, in terms of everyone is raising the same amount before it passes through the additional local monies piece of the formula, everyone will raise the required mill.
And that was part of the reorg agreement. And you can see on this, it has the equalized mill, which is what we're talking about, where it's like 7.1. So, but if you turn the page, and then you'll see at the bottom, all the way on the right, it's a different mill rate. But per the agreement for our district, we're using this. Yes. Okay,
So
good.
you picked up on a very specific piece of our formula, which is, I mean, one of the questions is always about that required local contribution piece and what does that look like and why is it different for us versus what the state would say if you called and asked them. So we did have some of the questions, or what we think were the questions from our meeting in May that I think we have some answers for. So maybe it would help to answer those. These, I think these are your questions, Colin, and I think they did a pretty good job of capturing what we were trying to come back with. So one of them was, which numbers was Suzanne using to generate the breakdowns? Was she using the ED 279 RLC or was she using our plan's RLC? Exactly your question there. And she was using it per our agreement. So she was using she maintained the equalized mill throughout all of her calculations. So that is the RLC per our current reorganization plan. Do we generally like the terrain of the scenarios that she highlighted for us or no? The Finance Committee kind of felt that wasn't a question for us to weigh in on as much as a question for the full board to have consideration on, just based on the direction we got. So the equity, and what's the equity of using the ratios and the scenarios that she highlighted, sort of the logic behind 25-75, 85-15, 50-50, for example. So this one, I think, is also a conversation for the board, but there is a little bit of background information around using the two variables of valuation and pupil counts. So according to Suzanne and Bill Stockmeyer before her and our research, the majority of districts use straight valuation. But the ones that don't use straight valuation, the majority of those use some form of a weighted average between valuation and pupil count. And I think I'm looking for my Bill Stockmeyer video. Here we go. So he actually, I thought, did a pretty nice job of kind of talking about why those are the things that they look at. A few observations relevant. The observations are based in part on general background experience across the state and in part upon a survey from our client file. So Bill Stockmeyer is an attorney for Drummond Woodsum who represents not only our district, but the majority of districts in the state of Maine, school districts in the state of Maine. So, and Bill has specialized in these types of areas, right? So they have attorneys that specialize in special ed law. They have attorneys that specialize in finance, employee law. So he has done a lot of work around the RSUs and forming and dissolving and over his years. So he said the majority of RSUs and SADs in the state apply, and this was from this is when we started this process in 2017. Majority of the states apply their cost sharing formulas only to the additional local funds. The majority of cost sharing formulas are based upon wholly on the state valuation percentages, and a significant minority of other cost sharing use a combination allocation of pupil counts and valuations. As far as they know, at that time, there were no RSUs that used strictly pupil counts to determine the cost sharing formula. And it was highly unusual for an RSU or SAD to use a factor other than valuation and pupil count. So that was one of the things we talked about as a finance committee was like, do we think these two variables are the right variables, and in what form should they take? Are there other variables we could consider? And we didn't really come up with any. It seemed like, ours was a little bit unusual in that they were fixed percentages, but if it did want to be something that was variable over time, pupil count and valuation seemed to be the ones that people who didn't do straight valuation were using. So I'm not sure if that answers your question around, why we would pick those two, but yeah.
So as far as the taxable rates, I haven't kept up with this for Freeport, even though it directly affects me and I should know this. So I know Brunswick is drastically changing their valuations, and they are adjusting the taxes along with that, which does include the tax revenue that then funds the schools. So is that something that is on Freeport's horizon?
So I would say that Freeport is probably in the best shape. If you're talking about market value, assessed value to market value, I would say the assessment of the three towns is probably in the best shape of Freeport because they do it much more frequently than they do in the other two towns. I think Durham is close to 10 years. But I will say that does not matter here because this is the state's valuation of the three towns. So if you tried to match up what Freeport says their tax rolls are or what Durham says their tax rolls are and what the state is reporting, you would never match up.
So the state dictates
every
what
year.
the towns get,
Valuation.
not the other way around.
Yes, correct. Yeah, because at first I mean that's obviously a huge issue for multi-district. I mean some SADs have 13 towns and with a variety of levels of current assessments versus market values. So the state takes all of that out of it and applies its own consistent methodology across every community in the state, and that's also how they divvy up. That's how they also figure out the required mill, because they say what the valuation is for the whole state of Maine by town, and they say this is how much money we're putting into it, and we expect you to raise. They back into the mill that way. Is my understanding.
And there's actually on the ED 279, you can see what the state values. It's on the, I don't know what page, page 23.
Yeah, 23 of
23.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm on a different one now.
Yeah, there's two ED 279.
Two ED 279.
There's a current one in last year's.
And I could have just referenced the other one, I guess. But so right in that middle section in B, they use a 3-year average of the state valuation.
Yeah. All right. So that's kind of the rationale behind pupil counts and valuations. Would the scenarios meet the criteria the RSU established for itself in determining our cost sharing formula? So in your packet on page... Where is it? I'm looking for the requirements. Oh, yes, here we go. So page 5. So those required criteria, those are pulled directly from the reorg plan. So it basically says that if we were to change the cost sharing formula, it would have to it would have to meet these criteria. We should consider all of them, all factors that we consider deem relevant, but we have to consider the following. So fairness, the effect, the clarity, the method being used, understood, consistency. So maintaining the RSU as a cohesive entity, right? So the goal is not to put a new cost sharing formula that ends up blowing up the RSU. That would not pass the consistency test of our criteria here, and effect. So the stability of the revenue streams from the taxpayers. So I guess that would come into play with the consistency. So I guess our answer to would they meet the criteria is it would depend on which scenario. If we chose to choose one, we chose. I think if, as Bill Stockmeyer said, no one has done 100% pupil count to their knowledge. I think if we did 100% pupil count, we would probably blow up the RSU. So that would not meet the criteria. But are there some in there that would? I think probably the answer is yeah. So if we materially were changing the impact, what if we phased in the new scenario over 3 to 5 years? How would that actually work? How would we communicate to the public that we're doing it? So a couple of thoughts there. One is, I think if we were materially changing the impact, we might be back to, does it meet the criteria of what we've set up above? Materially changing the impact. But if we were to make a change and wanted to phase it in, I went back actually to Bill Stockmeyer's. We put together a couple of ideas of just doing it a weighted average of a weighted average for a couple of years, right? So, a third of the new formula in the first year and 2/3 of the old formula. And then the second year would be 2/3 and a third. And the third year it would be fully the new formula, right? You could do it that way. You could do the same idea over 4 years or 5 years, whatever you wanted to do. And I went back and Bill Stockmeyer said that's exactly actually how towns have changed it. So it is possible to do, and communicating it to the public, that would obviously be of paramount importance to make sure people understood what we were doing, why we were doing it, how we were doing it, and what the impact would be. So that would be a little bit further down the road, I suppose, if the board came to the conclusion that we wanted to make a change. And then which pupil counts are we using as we calculate these? Are we using the ED 279? So Suzanne Bowden's numbers do use the number of subsidizable pupil counts on the ED 279. So whichever ED 279 you're looking at, you're going to look at section 4, and it's 4A, and that's the only place you would find in the ED 279 where they break it down by town. There's other pupil counts in the previous couple of pages, which we didn't give you, but they aren't broken out specifically by town. And so similar to the valuation, where they use a 3-year average to avoid any spikes or massive drop-offs in valuation, they do a 2-year average for the pupil counts. So pupil counts, according to Suzanne's scenarios, were from the ED 279, and that would be our suggestion as well. Our recommendation, if we wanted to move in a form where pupil counts and valuation were weighted, would be to use those. Just because, for consistency's sake, it's a simple, easy number to find. It's already an average of 2 years, so it helps minimize any big jumps or drops across the towns. So that would be the suggestion on that. So I think those were the main questions of the finance committee to bring back to this group, as well as try to provide some of the scenarios. Oh, I will just say one other thing. So the cost sharing document that we provided to you guys in May, if you tried to compare that to the 22-23 scenarios at the back here, they are a little bit different just because the actually what we were just talking about is where the pupil counts came from. We took the actual number of students in the 3 towns on October 1st of last year, as opposed to the average from the ED 279. So they're a little bit different. We just for the scenarios, we just wanted to be consistent in how it might look going forward. So we use the numbers from the ED 279, which would be our recommendation if the board felt like it wanted to make a move on the formula. What else, Maura?
Something else, that was a good summary, Michelle. Something else I would point out is that Freeport actually received subsidy this year. So when you're looking at the ED 279 for this year, I'm going to say this wrong, the equalized mill will be the same as, what do we call the other one?
Calculated mill rate.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you look at the ED 279 for last year and you're seeing 2 different mill rates, that's because last year the state said Freeport could raise all the money that we needed to fund our share of education based on our valuation. And then this year they said that we would get subsidy and that we could not raise all the money that we needed.
And just to keep it really interesting, the amount of subsidy is actually less than the minimum special education adjustment. So it's actually split between subsidy, which is on page 4 at the bottom, and minimum special education adjustment, which is on page 5. So the state has said for RSUs where there was a minimum receiver district or town prior to reorganization in one of a couple of base years, that you would be grandfathered in to receive this minimum special education adjustment as long as you were in the RSU. And so so sometimes Freeport gets no subsidy, and about $1 million. It's usually between $800,000 and $1 million of special ed money. It'll come in as a special ed adjustment, and sometimes it'll come in as split between subsidy and a special ed adjustment. It's the same amount of money, actually. Because it's the lesser or the greater of the 2 numbers. So subsidy or this minimum special ed adjustment. So there is actually a difference in the required mill at the bottom of page 5. Yeah, because they actually take out the required local contribution and they subtract out the special ed adjustment they're going to give them. Yeah, so it is a little bit different.
I think when Michelle's saying page 5, she's talking about page 5 of the ED 279. So it doesn't say page 5, but it is
Section 5. Yeah,
section
section 5. Sorry.
section. Yeah, section 5.
Yeah.
Apologies if I confused anyone, whereas I was referring to page 4 of the ED 279.
Yes. Yeah, I mean it's pretty complicated. I think even in the simplest of scenarios, school finance and funding from the state is complicated. I think that's one of the reasons we have the I guess I'll go back a little bit. The original request for consideration of changing the cost sharing formula, which no joke started in 2016, was, people didn't understand where those percentages came from for the additional local monies. So the 21%, the 12%, and the 68%. Yeah. 66. So where did those numbers come from? So a couple things to remember. The additional local monies, the cost sharing formula piece, as people refer to it, only applies to a small portion of the total budget. So our total budget was $39 million last year. How am I doing? 38.
Yeah, it is 38.
So $38 million. Additional local monies was about 11 of that. So the percentages that we're talking about, the cost sharing is a portion, a small portion, not a small portion, but not the whole budget, right? Yeah, a little less. Yeah. So a smaller portion of the budget. And then the question was like, where did those percentages come from? And they didn't change over time. So one of the things that we were asked originally was, can we figure out where these percentages came from? Do we think they're still fair? And do we, and should they vary over time? Should they adjust over time, or should they stay static? So ours have stayed static for the 15 years that the district has been in place. So one of the reasons that the scenarios you have are presented the way they are is we wanted to kind of look at the total contribution by town, because it's very different. The different makeups of the town mean different things in terms of funding for our district. So that first column, if you're looking at page 25, which is the 23-24 scenarios, the first column is the required local contribution per our plan. So that's that number from the ED 279, the page 4, section B, where they say, okay, this is your valuation. This is the required mill from the state. That number will match up with this required local contribution in this chart here. Okay, so this is what the state basically says you need to raise. The ALM is the portion of the budget that we apply our cost sharing percentages to, the 21, the 12, and the 30, and the 66%, right? And then there is a little bit of non-shared debt left. That's Durham's debt that it came into the RSU with for the new school. So Durham pays that solely on its own. And then that TOC number, total outside contribution, that is the subsidy and or the minimum special ed adjustment that the 3 towns get. So as a district, we get $7.3 million from the state of Maine to fund education. We take all of it, we put it all into one pot together, and we take it right off the top of our budget before we figure out that additional local money, right? So we said, what is each town contributing in total, right? They bring in their tax dollars that they're required to. They bring in their additional local monies based on our percentages. And they're also bringing in the money from the state that the state says that they are entitled to. And so we said, okay, what's the total, the required plus the ALM plus the outside contribution from the state? And what's that total contribution look like relative to the percentage of pupils? So how close are we now to being in line with, because one of the discussions around fairness was, if you have more kids in the district, shouldn't you pay more towards the additional local monies for that because you have more kids relative to the other pieces? And so one sort of measure of fairness is this sort of total contribution number. And what does that look like relative to the pupil counts that we have? So that's kind of why we laid it out this way. So you could, it's a little hard to just look at just the valuation or just because there's other pieces at play.
And I think also people were misunderstanding the percentages of our cost sharing and thinking that was the amount the town was paying for the whole budget. So, they were like, we're not paying the right amount because it doesn't look that way. But that's when we decided to, we did it all out and did the total contribution. So just to make it clear that those cost sharing percentages under our current plan are only applied to that ALM percentage or ALM dollars right there. So.
What other questions do people have as you were reading through this, we were trying to give you all the Cliff Notes, Kara, so you could come in totally prepared. I know. It's a lot. And so, we wanted to do what was asked of us, which was, confirm where the numbers came from. provide the scenarios that were requested and kind of put it into that total contribution layout so people could see what those look like. And we also added the differences so you could see what the impact would be to each town under the various scenarios. So, we kind of started at the top and said, okay, 100% valuation. And this pulls directly the same percentages if you pulled it off the 8279. So 17% of the valuation is Durham, 72% of the valuation is Freeport, and 10.5 is Pownell. And if you went all the way to the bottom of the page, we would get to the full other end of the spectrum, which is 100% pupil count, right? So we went from the top to the bottom, and then we picked some in the middle that seemed based on what she put in her presentation last year for people to consider. Yeah, Danielle.
Just so I understand this. So if we could look at that top one, the current plan. So the total, if we look at those numbers, so you're saying the total contribution that Durham puts in is about 30%.
Yep.
And we have about 32% of the pupils.
Yep.
And then that next number, that's the amount that
the 21%,
Yeah.
that's the current percentage of the cost sharing ALM. So when we do the budget every year, if you look at that budget summary sheet and you look in the additional local monies, those are the percentages that we apply to that $11.3 million to figure out what each. So down below the ALM percentages, that's the weighted average based on the different scenarios. So 100, 0, 75, 25. So those are the weighted averages from last year's ED 279. If those were how we were looking at them.
I just want to say something else. I know it says it in our document because we are talking about all kinds of different scenarios that we are charged with looking at this and evaluating it and answering questions. But it is absolutely not required to be changed. So if we were to look at this and say, wow, it looks like this cost sharing formula is doing a great job, and it looks fair, we see that it's clear now, we can look at historical data and see that it's been working well. So I mean, for me personally, I'm not sure why we would delve into changing something that's working well when there's so many levers to move. Really, I don't know. I guess I would want to hear if somebody really wanted to change it. I would love to hear your reason why. That's all. But I just wanted to mention, though, that that it's not required to be changed. So even though we're talking about changing it, it's not. That's all.
Good. That's a good point. Yes, Karen.
I have two questions. So first, are we planning tonight to vote on whether or not we're going to change this?
Yeah, and we'd like which number you want to pick.
Okay,
No.
great.
No, we are not.
I have to go to the bathroom. No. And my other thing, so once again, I agree with you. If it's not fixed or if it's not broken, don't fix it. Totally get you on that one. There are other variables that may be better to use, and this is kind of my specialty. So this is one thing that I do a lot of, and I'd be happy to look and think about that. I think the multiple siblings is probably a decent thing to at least look at and just see how we can just see how it impacts it. But I mean, I think it's probably the same. I think there's probably a lot more important things to work on right now. But yeah, I mean, there definitely are other variables that we may want to look at, but I don't know if that's something. I mean, I also agree that if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, it's funny because we went talk about rabbit holes, the cost sharing rabbit hole that I have found myself in basically since I joined the board in the first withdrawal. You know, it's interesting because, there's so many ways that you could potentially allocate burden, right? But one of the things that I think we need to be very cognizant of is the ability to readily get the information that we would need for it, and make it understandable. So while those percentages seem like they were pulled from the air, from the original RPC agreement, they weren't. We went back and it's interesting actually because Kelly Wentworth, our director of finance, was the director of finance when, even before that, right? So, I don't think she was the very first one, but she was close. She was there in the first couple of years, and apparently we don't eliminate emails even when you leave, because when she came back, her email box was still there, and she actually had an email that said, "This is how we came up with the formula."
Which it is the same thing that's written in the FAQs of the reorg plan, but for some reason it didn't
translate. It didn't continue on with people's remembered knowledge that basically what they did was they took the towns previous to joining the RSU, and they said they were spending, all of the towns were spending more than the state required, which is not uncommon. And they said how much more were they spending, and they used that to cut back into the formula of our current ALM. And back in 2016 and 2017, when Bill Stockmeyer first came and we asked him to look at this, he said, this formula has held up remarkably well given the changes that have happened. And we're now 6 or 7 years past that, and it still has held up remarkably well relative to sort of that contribution mindset of equity. We've met with the town leadership both last year and this year. This was a topic of a lot of conversation with town leadership in previous years. I think Freeport's chair last year went, "You guys are still talking about that? I thought you were done." So I don't feel like it's top of their list either. And what's that saying? I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze to go through the potential ramifications of a change.
And how many board members have examined this current cost sharing formula that we have on the finance committee in those years? And that, we've talked about it a lot, but it seems that everybody that has an impression of it, once you get into it and delve into it, they're like, "Oh, wow, this is actually a pretty good formula that they came up with." So, there's obviously, if the board wills it to change it, that's, where I stand.
Questions? What would help you feel comfortable with a decision either to change it or to not change it? Colin. Thank you for your questions, Colin. Those were great.
Yeah. I think all I would just flag is that from my understanding from the previous conversation and from the presentation we had in the spring, is just how to prepare ourselves for 10 years from now, and how much we want to count on, not exactly dumb luck, but like the luck that it has worked out, that this breakdown has actually held up. And from my recollection of the way we were talking about it in the spring and the way Suzanne was presenting it was saying, is it worth looking at a change that effectively tries to mimic what we currently have, but that would allow for greater comfort 5-10 years out for either the board or for the taxpayers or for the other town leaders to be able to say, okay, we understand that it is not fixed, and it's not that it's arbitrary, but it's not fixed and static, but it actually does adjust based on something, so that then if they desire to make a change, they really know what they're making an adjustment to. They really know that they're like, all right, we think we have we've put too much emphasis on pupil count and we need to ramp that back, or we haven't put enough. It just gives it, we're giving something to the future. We're giving something to the future of the district. That's my understanding of not the logic to why we would, I guess it would be the logic to why we would change the structure of the formula, not to say I don't think anybody's advocating for like a drastic shift in the percentages, but simply just how do we arrive at those percentages and how do we prepare for the future in that. That's more for me explaining to myself what I think we're talking about.
One thing that came up for me, Colin, when you're talking about percentages, and it just kind of hit me the other day when I was looking at everything again and looking through, with the fixed percentages, as much as that might seem like it could be a potential negative, maybe, it also means that each year, each town's amount goes up the same amount, right? So instead, if we had something that moved, potentially somebody could feel that all of a sudden if Freeport's went up a little more and then say, well, Pownell's went down. Well, I don't know. That's not fair anymore because now that's all, it's different. So it was just something that jumped out at me about that it just increased the same for every town each year. So it's just consistent that way.
Hadn't even thought of that. The number of times you look at these things, you pull something out every time you look at them.
Yeah, I think we all decided that each time we sat down to go over this information, it got even more difficult. So like 5 years on the board, and that's literally what it is.
So the fact that you even had a question, Carolyn, being on the board for 3 months, kudos to you. Yeah, and it's interesting because I kind of felt early on that maybe it was luck, right? Like this just happened to stand. But 15 years is a pretty good, solid track record. So maybe the RPC people were just brilliant. and we just,
are you listening?
Yeah.
Whoever you are.
Whoever you are. Yeah. I don't know. I totally understand that rationale. And I don't know. It's a big can of worms to open.
Yeah, I guess
once again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. If we go ahead and say, we're going to stick with this for the current, is it something that we're gonna vote on, within the next year and say, okay, we're going to stick with this plan? Does it then have to? Is that going to be in place for the next 10 to 15 years, or could we maybe go ahead and change it next year if we decide there are other variables that should be measured as part of it?
There's no limitation on the number of times. There's no actual limitations in the system, in the plan on changing the plan, the formula. Practical limitations of, implementation, consistency, those might be an issue, right? If we were just changing it all the time.
Communication to
right.
People, families.
So the communication piece, I think, is huge, because I think we would need to make sure that everyone was aware of not only the change. We also have the logistics of how you would make a change, because there's a couple of ways you could send it to referendum, or the board could make the decision. When we first broached this subject, I don't know, whenever the first time was, forever ago, the board felt that it, based on the complexity of understanding it, I mean, the idea of trying to educate the whole district enough to be able to know the nuances of a vote on this, I think would be difficult. So the thought was that it should be a board decision, but there are technically two different ways you could do it. But. Okay, good.
Colin, I was just thinking about what you were saying, and I was like, I guess I wouldn't feel comfortable changing a working formula in case there was a potential for a problem in the future. You know what I mean? I guess if we have 15 years of data that says this formula is working, but we're worried in 5 years it might not work, I feel like that's something the board should address in 5 years, personally.
I guess I would just add that I agree with you, Beth. I guess I would add that maybe something this current board could think about doing for the benefit of a future board is having the finance committee sort of monitor along the way, and then also making sure that the current finance committee passes the knowledge that we have on to the future finance committee, because I think the three of people who we coincidentally have on the finance committee right now, and Candy as well, there's 4 of us that have been here since we started talking this time about changing the formula, right? And so when folks turn over, it's good that some of us are still here, because if we weren't, then transferring that knowledge and understanding all of it takes time, and I've evolved in my thinking about it over these years because it's just so complicated. So maybe that is something we could think about doing, monitoring it and seeing what the percentages are. I think, if in 10 or 15 years something drastically changed, like Durham's valuation, like Durham or Pownell had a bunch of development and their valuation went way up, we would want to think about that and what the formula is and how we would want to change it. But I think that, currently none of the, I guess I'll lay my cards on the table, none of the scenarios seem better to me than what we have in place already.
Yeah, the old lady will say something here. First of all, you guys have done an amazing job here getting all of this information in front of us. And I agree with you totally, Beth. I think we should just leave it alone. Because we have had, over the years, we've had a couple times where it's gotten a little dirty and nasty. And if things are working now and we're not having any problems, we ought to leave it alone now. But going along with what Maura said, that the finance committee can kind of look at it every couple of years or every year just to see what's changing and what we might need to do. The other thing that went through my mind, one of the reasons we may not have as much negativity right now, at least I know about Durham, I don't know about other towns, but some of the town leaders have changed a little bit too. And that certainly has made a difference in who's making noises and complaining and all of that kind of thing. So,
and I will say that, Maura, I'm really glad that you mentioned the finance committee monitoring and that, because I had the same thought, thinking that I've come to this, where I am with this, because I've looked at all of this historical data. And I feel like if you're not looking at the historical data and seeing how it works and seeing that you lose that, and then you're like, wait a minute, what's going on? And I think that's what had happened in the first place. It just we formed the RSU, and then it was like, okay, leave it for a while, but then all of a sudden it got too far, and then trying to, we got it. But so I think if we keep our, finger on the pulse and make sure that it's maintaining what it's supposed to do, that's a very important piece.
And I think, and this is one of the things that Kelly brought back with her, is kind of a more consistent agendas for finance committee year to year. We always look at this, we always look at that, we always review the audit. We can add this to our running agendas, because I think you're exactly right, Beth. I think that's where we lost, where the original percentages came from, is because nobody looked at it in those first 4, because we couldn't change it for 3 years. That was in there, that it couldn't change for 3 years, but it said we would check it at 5 years. Well, at 5 years, we were, between Durham's withdrawal effort and Freeport's withdrawal effort. We're like, well, we're not going to change it now because we might be blowing up. And then, then that went to bed. Then Durham tried to withdraw, and then we hit COVID, and it just never. Yeah, it just never happened, right? And so then we've sort of been perpetually trying to do this. And to Mara's point of when the board changes, it's like a restart of the education process. And so, the ability to kind of look at where we've come, where we're at, and say we're comfortable with where we are, and we agree that we're not going to make a change now, but we will continue to monitor it to make sure that we don't suddenly get out of whack. Because I do agree, Colin, that we don't want to wait till we're in an awful spot and then have to make a change that could be really materially impactful to a town. So making sure that we don't wait until it's going to cause a bigger problem down the road, but consistently reviewing it to make sure that we still feel like, yeah, these are still in line with what we find to be a reasonably fair. Yep.
After hearing you guys talk about this, I'm firmly in your camp. I definitely wouldn't change it right now.
Yeah.
I think I think I agree. The thing I kept trying to think about as I was reviewing all of this was just coming back to our because I think of all of the work that we do as a board, this is the one where it can balkanize us the most in terms of saying like whether just as individuals, like I was elected by the people of Freeport, even though I serve all of the children in the district. This is one of the issues that has the potential to sort of balkanize us into sort of town interest in that way. And so I found myself really trying to come back to saying, all right, at what point does any decision about this have to do with that fundamental charge that we have, which is that like to serve all the children in the district. And honestly, like I couldn't really come up with a really clear way to think about that, but I wanted to flag it because I think it's important that it's like we're not, even though yes, I am a taxpayer in Freeport and I have sort of that as a context. That's actually not what I'm here to be thinking about. I'm here to be thinking about how does this cost sharing formula or a potential one in the future, how does that best serve all of the kids in the district? So I just wanted to flag that. I mean, I'm not sure if anybody has any wisdom on that, but as I said, I couldn't kind of arrive at, as I looked through it, I wasn't like, oh yes, this definitely, like if Pownell paid for all of it, that would be better for the kid. I mean, I think that's true. I think we can all agree that's true. But no, it was her when Leek told me. She picked that out actually. Yeah. No, but I was looking through it and I was like, I can't find that, but I did want to flag that because I think that especially given what Candy was mentioning in terms of some of the nastiness in the past, which did really have to do with town v town. I think coming back to saying yes, like this body, our charge is serving all of the kids, and is there any other lens that we haven't brought to this that we should?
I do have one idea on that front, because I think one of the issues, if I'm gathering correctly, between the towns was overall Pownell and Durham's adjusted mill rate is a little bit higher than Freeport's.
We use the equalized mill.
You use the equalized mill. So, yeah. Okay, will you remind me what this is again? Is this the actuals or is this?
This one, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the required local contribution per our reorg plan for each town.
Okay.
And this is the mill that we're using, so it's equal. And then
and then what was this one?
So this is how the state figures it.
Because of the minimum receivership of
Got
Freeport.
it. Okay, never mind. We're good.
But that was part of the reorg plan, and using that different required local contribution equalize the mill, so then everybody's paying the same rate, you know.
To Colin's question, I know we've thought a lot about, fairness and what those different definitions could be and how we raise money for the school district. And I think that the things that Suzanne and Bill looked at were fiscal capacity and number of students. And Freeport has greater fiscal capacity to raise money based on property taxes, which is why we're required to do that and why our share, and we also have more students, but that's, we can contribute more because we can raise that money from our property tax value. And I think one thing that I had flagged for the finance committee is if you're talking about impact to our communities, we all have people, despite, Freeport's greater valuation, or however you want to measure different factors like Pownell's slightly higher average income. I don't know if that's still true, or different things in different communities. We all still have people in our communities who cannot afford to pay their property taxes. And that's one of the things I personally have found the most difficult as a board member, and why, I think we're all here to be very diligent about our budget and our finances and balancing fiscal responsibility with the needs of our students and our community. And it's very hard when you have people in your community who can't afford their property taxes. And I think that's why there can be that tendency to to have towns be pit against each other. And the fact is that I don't think we can change the formula in a way that will fix that problem, because we're not basing it, we can't, and so I would, call on the state or anyone who's listening who has, that input or power to say, we're funding our schools based on property taxes. And is that the best system? And I think those decisions are beyond us, and changing this formula in a way that would help all the people in all of our communities be able to comfortably afford their property taxes is just impossible. And I feel like that's kind of what we want to do, but it's an impossible task. And there are programs out there to provide property tax relief to people who cannot afford them. And I think that, those kinds of things, expanding those or finding a more fair and equal way of funding education, those things are beyond our control. And so I feel limited by those in making this decision.
In response to that, would there be a way when the finance committee meets with the town leaders to be able, because they must have metrics on that of, what percentage of property tax were we able to collect on time, and maybe we could track that for a little while. And that looking at the macroeconomics right now, the people who are going to be able to pay their taxes, that is going to go down. And so that could become an issue. And that might be something just to also keep a pulse on going forward, because when we start to see that drop low, we might want to really rethink how we're doing this.
Yeah, I think that comes into play more when we're talking about the budget as a whole, right? Not how we divvy it up amongst the towns so much, but more trying to make sure that we're being really cognizant of every dollar we're spending. I'll be interested to hear what your guys' thoughts are after going through this budget process, because I think that this being your first one, because I think we do a pretty good job of making sure that, we're not sort of frivolously adding positions or costs to the budget. But we do, first and foremost, try and meet the needs of the kids. So I think the ability, I share Maura's frustration in that there isn't a better way to do it, but with what we have available to us, we can do the best that we can. because it's a zero sum game, right? I mean, all these numbers, red and black in the difference column equals zero. So $1 more here is $1 less there. It's like a reval, right? They don't change how much taxes they're collecting. They just change who's paying it. And if there was a town where everyone could pay their taxes and had plenty left over, then maybe that would be a different discussion. But I don't think that's the case, to your point. I think it's an issue everywhere. So, and certainly in our towns. So I think it's just a reminder. It's a good reminder as we go into our budget presentations, which will start at our next board meeting, to make sure that we're continuing to be respectful of the taxpayers. Okay. Everyone okay? Care.
I just want to thank you so much for putting this all together, the Finance Committee, and for everyone's thoughts and considerations. It's really been helpful for me, and I am happy to leave it as is, if that's worth saying right now.
All right. I feel
Sorry,
consensus.
my idea about panel paying everything is still on the
table?
I think Beth said she'd pay everything.
Not just Pownell, Beth.
So I guess, could I ask on the Finance Committee's behalf then, is it not necessary? Are we going to be discussing this again? Is that something or is that something we need to think about and not decide right now?
I mean, I'm happy to say no, but I don't want to limit your ability to process and
right. I think it
consider.
was just we didn't want to make that final call tonight.
Yeah, we didn't
just
want to make
because
it.
we didn't want to pressure everybody with the information. We wanted, I think, at least I wanted to have people be able to ask a lot more questions with everything.
I think this is PTSD for Beth with her second board meeting where she was forced to vote on a cost sharing formula.
Yeah,
She's like,
that was
I'm
my second
totally not
meeting.
equipped for this.
Yeah. So I'm like, no, I'm going to ease you guys into it as much as possible.
So I guess my thought was if there was going to be a change, we wouldn't necessarily do it today because we want people to process it. But if the general consensus is that we are comfortable leaving it the way it is, then I think we could probably put it to bed and move on. But I'll open that up for people's thoughts.
I mean, I think we can put it to bed. I think it would be helpful, and maybe this is more of a Finance Committee thing because y'all have been more in the weeds on it, of just to maybe picking up on what we were saying earlier about once a kind of every year keeping an eye on I like that. I was like, oh yeah, that sounds really good. And I'm like, what do we keep an eye on? What does it actually mean? So I think so I
just join the Finance Committee and then you can find
well,
out.
there you go. No, I'm on the Finance Committee for the for Region 10, so I'm just beginning there. I think it might be helpful for maybe the Finance Committee at some point before the end of the year to come back and be like, here's what we're going to keep an eye on. Here's actually what every year and when we're going to do it. What's sort of the moment where we kind of take a look at, again, what are those variables that you think we need to be keeping an eye on, to be able to say yeah, this is still kosher. We still do what we're doing. But just a 4-point checklist or something like that would be helpful, I think.
That is a fair request. All right. I think we all wrote it down, so one of us will remember. All right. Good. So moving on.
We're really moving on.
Oh my God, you don't even know how happy that makes me.
So consensus just for Jimmy's minutes.
Yes. Yep. Just Beth. Yep.
I think you guys are going to get much.
Might have to rethink this budget. All right. So we don't have any policy. We don't have any unfinished. We don't have new. We don't have personnel. We don't have any public comment. All right. So is it 9:58? Oh, we got to get this motion in 2 minutes. You guys can't outvote it. Do I have a motion for consideration and approval to enter into executive session as outlined in 1 MRSA section 4056A for the purpose of discussing the superintendent's evaluation performance goals? Someone has to. Thank you, Carolyn. Malik, all those in favor? Clearly not calling. All right. None opposed. All right. Thank you. All right. So